I was reaching into the kitchen drawer for my dead wife's wedding ring when I noticed the sugar bowl lid was turned backward. Not off, not crooked enough for company. Just backward, so the little blue painted thistle Evelyn always kept facing the stove was looking toward the pantry instead, and for one cold second I stood there with my fingers in the drawer. Had the absurd immediate feeling that something in the room had already answered a question I had not yet asked. The kitchen was quiet, except for the refrigerator's low hum and the tick of the small clock above the mudroom door. Morning light had come in thin and level through the sink window, laying itself across the island in pale bars that showed every flour scratch in the butcher block. The coffee I had made 12 minutes earlier still smelled a little too dark because I had let the grounds run long. I looked at the sugar bowl again, same white china, same blue line around the lip. Same chip at the base from the year Ben dropped it, helping Evelyn reset after Thanksgiving. Only the lid was turned the wrong way. I put it back the way she would have wanted. That was the first thing I did wrong that morning. I do not mean morally. I mean in the practical sense a widower can understand. I corrected the room before I asked whether the room had been trying to tell me anything. The ring lay where I had left it for 4 months in the shallow oak drawer beside the stove inside a small ceramic pinch bowl Evelyn once used for sea salt when she was pretending a roast chicken needed finesse. After her funeral, I had cleaned the ring with a soft cloth, put it in the bowl and slid the bowl into the drawer because leaving it on the counter had made the whole kitchen feel too much like a chapel and too little like a place where people were expected to eat. Since then, I had touched it 3 times and taken it out twice always, meaning to bring it to Arthur Bell downtown, because one of the prongs had gone soft, and I could not bear the thought of neglect doing what death had not. This time I lifted it out and held it in my palm. Gold warmed slowly. That was one of the things Evelyn had loved about old rings. They took time to decide you belonged to them. The stone was not large. She had never wanted large. We married later than most, both of us, with old hurts and grown children and the sort of caution people mistake for serenity. When I gave her the ring in the little restaurant on High Street where they still used cloth napkins because the owner was too stubborn to modernize, she had turned it once under the table lamp and said, "Tom, this is exactly the kind of ring a sensible woman could wear while kneading dough." Then she laughed because she knew very well there was nothing sensible about marrying again in your 50s when you had already learned how expensive love could become. I stood there now in our kitchen in the house on Oakview, where she had lived 11 years and I had lived 19, and pressed the pad of my thumb lightly over the bent prong. The house was a brick 2-story built in 1948 with white-painted trim, Evelyn said, made it look more honest than fashionable, and oak floors that talked too much in winter. The front rooms still carried the smell of old books and furnace heat from the night before. The kitchen had been redone by the previous owners in an expensive way Evelyn disliked on principle, until she realized the deep drawers meant she could organize baking sheets without bruising her shins, at which point she forgave them their excess. There was a mud room off the back with cubbies Claire swore kept the house from descending into disorder. There was a narrow pantry corner Evelyn made magical with labels and little glass jars, and one absurd wallpaper panel of lemons she bought on clearance because, as she said, a pantry was allowed one foolish thing. I had not changed much since she died, not because I considered the house sacred. I do not. Houses are boards and brick and labor and debt and weather. But a lived-in home acquires the shape of a person's attention, and in the months after Evelyn's death, I found that moving certain things felt less like redecorating than erasure. So I kept the dish towels folded in thirds in the drawer left of the sink, though I myself had always just rolled them. I kept the red crock of wooden spoons beside the stove. I still opened the curtains in the dining room before I opened the blinds over the sink because she used to say, "The front of a house ought to be awake before the back started working." I still wiped the island counter in long strokes north to south, because circles in her view only pushed crumbs around and insulted wood grain. These were the routines of a decent man trying not to come apart in a kitchen with too much memory in it. That is all I thought they were. I slipped the ring into the watch pocket of my jeans and poured fresh coffee into my travel mug. The steam rose dark and bitter. On the stove, the skillet I had used for 2 eggs cooling in butter left that faint browned milk smell Evelyn always said made an empty house seem less empty. I rinsed the pan, set it in the rack, wiped the counter dry, and told myself I would be back from Bell Jewelers before lunch. From the hall came the small rhythmic thud of footsteps on carpet, followed by silence. Then the bathroom door upstairs clicked shut. June. She and Claire had been living with me since January, though living with me made it sound more intentional and less like family weather moving through an old house until you gave up pretending it was temporary. Claire's divorce had finished uglier than anyone deserved, and the apartment she could afford with a 14-year-old and legal fees looked like a place built for short-term defeat. Evelyn had said they were coming here before I had finished my second objection, not because she was soft, because she was practical, and practical women understand that sometimes the worst thing in the room is the idea that one can discuss logistics while somebody's life is plainly splitting open. At the time, I thought it was good of us. Good of Evelyn especially. Claire was my daughter from my first marriage, and she and Evelyn had never been enemies exactly, but peace between women who inherit one another. Late is not the same as ease. There had always been a slight over-carefulness to their good manners. A little too much gratitude in Claire. A little too much brightness in Evelyn when they agreed about things. Still, the arrangement had settled well enough on the surface. Claire handled school forms and schedules. June, quiet as a folded note, moved through the house like a child trained not to leave edges sticking out. Evelyn made the kitchen hold. I took that for family life. Now Evelyn was gone, and Claire remained with June because I could not see myself sending my own daughter into fresh humiliation on top of everything else, and because a man who has buried a good wife becomes susceptible to the fantasy that the least he can do is keep the house generous. The bathroom door opened. Water ran briefly. Another door closed. I heard Claire's voice next low and even saying something I could not make out, followed by June's softer answer. I put the mug lid on. When I turned toward the mudroom, my eyes went once more to the sugar bowl. The thistle faced the stove now. Correct. Ordinary. I stood there a second longer than I needed to and tried to remember whether I had myself turned the lid wrong yesterday evening while clearing up after supper. I could not remember doing it. That meant nothing. A man alone inside grief can forget small things while remaining very competent at the large ones. I got my keys from the hook by the back door. Evelyn's apron still hung on the neighboring peg pale blue, with the pocket she had lined by hand in a cheerful striped cloth because, as she said, if you were going to wear something practical every day, it deserved one private extravagance. I did not touch it. If I touched it in the morning, the day tended to go badly. On the way through the mudroom, I paused at the family command wall Claire had set up with a monthly calendar, 2 clipboards, and a shallow basket for mail. The April grid was clean and overfull at once, every square, written in the same narrow mechanical pencil hand. School pickups, Ben's birthday, trash day, June orthodontist, my cardiology check in Columbus. The pencil was clipped neatly to a corded magnet straight as a plumb line. I had once admired the system. That morning, I only saw how much writing there was. The back door opened with its usual stiff-latch complaint. Air came in damp and raw with late March earth underneath it. In the yard, last year's hydrangea heads still clung brown and papery because I had not had the heart to cut them back. Evelyn liked them that way through winter. Said they gave the yard the decency not to pretend spring before it earned the right. I drove downtown in light traffic with the radio off. Bell Jewelers sat on a brick corner half a block from the public square, between a dress shop that had somehow survived 3 recessions and a shoe repair place that smelled even through its closed door like leather and glue. Arthur Bell had known Evelyn before he knew me. Her mother used him. Her aunt used him. When we married, Evelyn brought my mother's old watch to him for cleaning because she said a family is partly just shared tradesmen. His shop was narrow and warmly lit in a way that managed not to feel theatrical. Dark wood cases, old brass, pulls a carpet runner worn thin in the center, a clock that kept better time than its face suggested. Arthur himself was behind the counter with his glasses low on his nose and a loupe in one hand, examining what looked like a pearl earring. He was 74, neat as a banker, and twice as careful. When he saw me come in, he set the loop down and gave a small, grave nod that acknowledged both ordinary business and the fact that my wife was dead. "Tom," he said. "Good to see you. You too, Arthur. You're looking thin. That's because I'm old, and people say things when they don't know what else to say." He smiled faintly. "That may be the truest thing said in this shop all week. There are men with whom comfort consists in not having to perform warmth. Arthur was one of them." I took the ring from my pocket and laid it on the black pad he slid toward me. The gold looked smaller than it had in the kitchen. "One prong's gone soft," I said. "I should have brought it sooner." He did not touch it right away. He looked at it first, then looked at me. Then he picked it up between finger and thumb and turned it under the lamp. For a second I saw something pass over his face. Not surprise exactly, but recognition complicated by memory. "Yes," he said softly. "This one." The phrasing struck me as odd enough that I noticed it, though not yet odd enough that I understood anything by it. "Can it be fixed?" "Oh, certainly." He lifted the loop, studied the setting, then the band. "You've kept it well. It's been in a drawer, Arthur. Hard to mistreat something in a drawer." He did not answer. He set the loop down, cleaned his glasses with the cloth from his breast pocket. Put them back on. When he spoke again, his voice had changed just enough to make the back of my neck tighten. "Tom," he said, "I'm going to ask you something, and I'd like you not to take offense before I finish asking it." I felt a small resistance inside myself, the way you do when a doctor reaches for gravity in his voice before you've yet heard the word they mean to use. "All right. Your granddaughter June," he said. "Does she still say sorry before she speaks?" I stared at him. "What?" He held my eyes a moment, then looked down at the ring in his hand. "Evelyn brought this in a number of times over the last few years. More than was strictly necessary, if I'm honest. Resizing once, yes. A stone check now and then, perhaps. But there were visits that felt less like jewelry matters than reasons to stand in a quiet shop and think with another person in the room. I heard the clock in the shop. A customer somewhere behind me on the sidewalk, the blood moving in my ears. "Arthur," I said carefully, "what are you talking about?" He seemed to regret every inch of what he had already said and yet be past the point of taking any of it back. She asked me once, he said, that if the ring ever came in without her, and if I thought it was the right time to mention it, I was to ask whether the girl still says sorry before she speaks. I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because the human mind will sometimes reach for ridicule before fear. If fear arrives in the wrong shape, that doesn't mean anything. It meant something to her. To what? To June having manners. My own voice had gone sharper than his had. "Arthur, she was 14, not feral. I know how old she was." "She is," I said automatically because I could not bear how quickly he had put June into the grammar of loss. He inclined his head. "She is." There was a pause in which he might have decided to retreat into discretion again. I would have let him. Perhaps I wanted him to. Instead, he laid the ring back on the pad and said very gently, "Evelyn was not a dramatic woman, Tom. No, she was not. She was witty and private, firm in practical matters, patient until she was not. And never once in the 11 years I knew her did she use alarm to make herself important. If Evelyn worried, she tended to put bread in the oven first. I felt that fact land in my body before I let it land in my mind." "What exactly did she say?" I asked. Arthur's hand rested on the counter. Steady, veined, age-spotted in the honest way age spots are when a man has worked indoors and still somehow accumulated them anyway. She said, he answered, "If Tom ever brings this in alone, ask him whether the girl still says sorry before she speaks. If she does, then I was right to be afraid. There are sentences that do not sound real until the room around them stays real." That was one. The shop remained what it had been. Cases, brass watch bands, the faint warm metal smell of repair work. Arthur Bell's clean shirt cuffs traffic outside a woman's laugh from the sidewalk. Nothing in the world altered to mark that something had just been placed inside my life that did not belong there. Afraid of whom, I heard myself ask. He shook his head once. She didn't say. You didn't ask, I did. A brief, tired look crossed his face. She said she was still hoping she was wrong. For a moment I could not feel the floor properly beneath me. Not dizziness exactly. More a slight estrangement from gravity, as if the body had lost patience with the mind's pace. When was this, I said. The first time she said it outright, almost 2 years ago. There were earlier visits, more guarded. He paused. She had me resize the ring twice in 1 year. Then the stone checked, then the prong work. A ring can become a reason, Tom. People do that. You're telling me my wife used her wedding ring to send herself out of the house because she was afraid of somebody inside it. I am telling you that your wife trusted me to remember one sentence if the day ever came. I looked at the ring on the black pad and had the absurd sensation that I should not have brought it. That by moving it from the drawer into the daylight, I had disturbed not gold, but a pressure point. Why didn't you tell me at the funeral, I asked. Arthur's eyes, tired and not unkind, came back to mine. Because the dead do not get to rearrange the living by way of tradesmen unless I am very sure. And because you had just buried your wife. That was fair enough that I hated him for saying it. I picked up the ring, then set it down again. Fix it, I said. Do whatever it needs. He nodded. Come back this afternoon. I was halfway to the door when he said my name again. I turned. If it helps, he said she never looked afraid in the sense people mean when they say it carelessly. She looked occupied, watchful, and tired. Tired. Of all possible words, that one lodged deepest because I had noticed it. Not in a heroic way, not with some noble foresight. I had noticed she was tired in the last year, more often than before. There had been mornings when she stood at the island a beat too long before reaching for a bowl. Evenings when she smiled at something Claire said, and then when nobody was looking, pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose as if adjusting a pressure there. I had attributed it to age stress. The strain of a Fuller house, her mother's decline before the end, everything ordinary and respectable. I had never asked whether there might be anything in our kitchen worth fearing. Outside, the air had warmed by 2 degrees and still felt cold. I stood on the sidewalk with my keys in hand and watched a city bus grind past the square. Arthur's words did not arrange themselves into meaning. They moved around without settling. Does the girl still say sorry before she speaks? It was such a strange sentence that for 10 minutes I convinced myself it was less alarming than it sounded. Evelyn had always cared about language. Perhaps she meant June had become overly apologetic after the divorce. Perhaps she worried the child was anxious. Perhaps this was one of those female concerns grown more intricate in transmission between women and old jewelers, and the rest of us, poor, clumsy men, left holding a thing by the wrong edge. I drove home disliking myself for the eagerness of that explanation. When I came in through the back door, the house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and toasted bread. Claire stood at the counter in a cream sweater, one hand on her mug, the other making neat pencil marks on the calendar while she ate half a grapefruit with a spoon. The mechanical pencil tapped once against the board before she clipped it back to its magnet. "You were longer than I expected," she said, turning with a smile that looked as though it had been placed correctly. Arthur had work backed up. He always does. June went up to finish her history reading. She glanced at the empty spot near the stove where I usually set my keys, then to my hand. "You left the ring?" "Yes. How's the setting loose prong?" She nodded as though this completed the subject. I set my keys down. The sugar bowl sat on the counter beside the fruit bowl, Thistle facing the stove. The lid now exactly centered. The precision of that bothered me more than the earlier wrongness had. Claire noticed my gaze. "I wiped around there," she said. "You had coffee grounds on the counter." Thank you. She took another spoonful of grapefruit. Claire had always been beautiful in the exacting, expensive, featured way that made men forgive themselves for calling women composed when what they meant was carefully held together. At 41, she still had the long bones and good cheek structure of the girl who used to walk into school concerts 15 minutes late and make every father in the room sit up as if his own life had just passed judgment on him. But close up you could see the strain now, not weakness. Friction. Everything in her seemed a little too efficiently arranged, like a room where no cushion had been allowed to relax into its own corners. How was she this morning, I asked. Who, June? Claire blinked once. Fine. Why? No reason. She has a quiz second period and didn't sleep great. Claire set her spoon down carefully, bowl to saucer, with almost no sound. Tom, if you're worried about her, you can just ask. There was nothing accusatory in the sentence. That was what made it difficult. Claire's sharpest moves had always come wrapped in permission. I'm not worried, I said. Arthur just asked after her. Oh. A pause. That's odd. Yes. Did he say why? No. That was my first lie in the matter, and I knew it was one as soon as it left my mouth. Claire's face changed not at all, but a small stillness entered her shoulders. She lifted her mug and drank. Then she smiled again, lighter this time. Well, I'm sure she'll be thrilled to know she's developed admirers in the jewelry trade. I almost told her then. Not because I trusted her. Because habit urged me toward the old family reflex, bring strange things into the open, let people explain themselves, have coffee. Make common sense reassert itself, but Arthur's voice stayed with me. If I thought it was the right time to mention it, the phrase implied there might be a wrong time. The idea irritated me. It also held me still. I'm going to check the mailbox, I said. Claire nodded. Could you see if my tax packet came? Outside the mailbox held nothing but a hardware circular and a charity appeal. I stood at the curb longer than necessary, looking back at the house. From there, the kitchen windows reflected only sky. The place looked the way it always had. Brick white trim narrow side drive, the front maple not yet leafed out. A lived-in Ohio house with a decent roof and a widow's hydrangeas and a daughter's car in the drive. Nothing about it suggested that an old jeweler had just implied my wife once feared someone under that roof. Ben called around noon to ask if I wanted help bringing the porch furniture out next weekend. I nearly said no, then yes, then asked instead how the kids were, because ordinary conversation suddenly felt like a form of respect for reality. They're good, he said. Lily's got some spring thing at school Thursday if you want to come. I'd like that. There was a pause. You sound tired. I looked at the mudroom wall while I held the phone. Pencil marks, clipboards, a school lunch menu. June's choir permission slip, a coupon for mulch. Arthur said something odd this morning, I said. Ben waited. That was one of his best qualities. He had learned young that his father would often arrive at a thing only if given enough silence to dislike the road there. What kind of odd I took Evelyn's ring in? The loose prong. Yes. He made a soft acknowledgement, and he asked whether June still says sorry before she speaks. That got the silence to sharpen. What does that mean? I don't know. He said Evelyn told him to ask me that if I ever brought the ring in without her. Jesus. And he didn't explain. He said she was afraid of someone at home. I heard Ben exhale through his nose. Not dramatically. Just once. Dad. I know. That could mean a lot of things. That's what I've been telling myself. What do you think it means? I looked through the mudroom doorway into the kitchen. The island stood clean in the noon light. One of the stools pushed in one slightly angled out where someone had left it. I could not have said whose without thinking too hard. I think I said slowly that if Evelyn was afraid, I ought to have known. That doesn't follow. It does to me. Ben was quiet again. Then, you going to ask Claire? Not yet. Good. The word came so quickly I almost missed it. Why good? Another pause, shorter this time. Because if this is nothing, you'll only make a mess, and if it's something, you should know what you're holding before you show it. I turned that over. Ben was not a suspicious man by nature. Practical, yes, not suspicious. He built decks, argued with suppliers, coached Little League in a voice so calm the children obeyed him as if they had invented the idea themselves. For him to say good that quickly meant something, though I was not yet ready to decide what. You ever think June apologizes too much? I asked. He did not answer at once. I thought she was nervous around adults, he said finally. And around Claire. Around Claire. Maybe that's unfair. Maybe, I said. But the word had already lodged. That afternoon I did the sort of things widowers do when they cannot yet bear the size of a thought. I changed furnace filters. I tightened the loose knob on the hall closet door. I cut the dead heads off one side of the hydrangeas and then stopped halfway through because the rawness of the cut stems bothered me. At 3:30, June came home, set her backpack precisely in the mudroom cubby, and called "Hi, Grandpa," in the tone of a child entering a house where volume has already been agreed upon elsewhere. I was at the island sorting junk mail. Hi, sweetheart. How was school? She came in, halfway thin, shoulders tucked in the Navy school cardigan she hated because the sleeves never stayed pushed up. There was color in her face from the wind outside and a faint dent across her forehead where I knew she habitually pressed her books there while juggling the front door. Good, she said. How'd the history quiz go? She looked at me. Not oddly. Just directly enough that I noticed her eyes were Evelyn's exact shade of hazel only when the light came from the side. Sorry, she said. I think okay. The room did not change. That was the worst part. No music stung, no glass broke. The house did not have the decency to shudder. A girl in a navy cardigan simply apologized before telling her grandfather how she thought she had done on a quiz. And something in me, delayed by hours and maybe years, finally understood that Arthur Bell had not given me a metaphor. I set the junk mail down. June had already started to move toward the sink, reaching automatically for the plate from my late lunch, as if clearing me should come before taking off her own backpack. Up in the hallway, Claire's footsteps sounded once, twice, then paused at the landing. June glanced toward the sound before her fingers touched the plate. I heard Arthur's voice again, and beneath it, with a violence so quiet it nearly passed for memory, I heard Evelyn's from a Sunday months before light, and almost laughing. Leave that honey. Batter first. Nobody ever died of a plate waiting 5 minutes. At the time I had smiled because I thought she was being kind. Now, June stood beside my unfinished plate hands, already moving to make the counter neat, and for the first time since my wife's death, I looked at my own kitchen and felt not sorrow but dread. June's fingers stopped half an inch above my plate. It was such a small halt that another man might not have seen it. A child standing at a kitchen island after school, cardigan still on backpack, not yet unstrapped, reaching to be useful. Then the sound from upstairs, the third stair from the landing, the one that had always clicked a little, no matter how often I tightened the screws beneath it, and her hand arrested itself in air as if usefulness required permission. I looked at the plate. 2 bites of ham sandwich left. Mustard drying on the crust, a dull fork. Nothing dramatic in the world. Still, I said, because I did not know what else to do with the dread that had come into the room with her apology. Leave it, June. She blinked. Sir, leave the plate. Her eyes moved from the plate to my face, then toward the hallway. I can take it. I know you can. The pause stretched. She seemed to be waiting not for my answer, but for the room to give one. Then Claire came down the stairs, one hand trailing lightly along the rail, and the moment ended so cleanly I would have doubted it if I had not been standing in it. There you are, Claire said to June in that low, warm voice of hers that always sounded as though she had already forgiven something minor. Shoes first, sweetheart. Then snack. June's hand dropped at once. Sorry. For what? Claire smiled, but there was the faintest edge of instruction under it, the way some women can lay a blade beneath velvet and call it homemaking. Go on. June went to the mudroom bench and sat to unlace her shoes. Not sloppily, not with the weary carelessness of a 14-year-old who has spent 7 hours at school and wants only to stop being looked at. She unlaced them neatly, set them toe to heel on the tray, stood, hung the cardigan over the peg instead of dropping it on the back of a chair, and came back to the island. Claire took in my plate, my expression the untouched crumbs. "You feeling all right?" she asked. "I'm fine." "You didn't finish lunch?" "I wasn't that hungry." Claire reached for the plate. "I'll get it." There was something almost elegant in how she solved disorder. You could watch her do it and mistake the efficiency for love. Perhaps I had done that more than once. Perhaps more than once was the problem. I said, "Leave it," I heard myself say. She looked up, not startled. Claire did not startle easily. Her hand rested on the edge of the plate, and for 1 second the whole kitchen seemed to pull itself taut around that small contact. "I beg your pardon," she said. "I'll clear it later." A beat passed. Then she released the plate, not abruptly, not with offense, but with that little grace people use when they want you to feel the awkwardness is your own. "Of course," she said. "I was only helping." June had gone still beside the island. I could feel her watching without appearing to. The old instinct rose in me to smooth things, to take any edge out of the air before it caught on someone vulnerable. I almost said thank you. I almost laughed and told them both I was being foolish. Instead, I picked up the junk mail again and shuffled it pointlessly. Claire opened the refrigerator. "June, would you like apple slices or crackers?" "Either is fine." Claire turned her head slightly. That wasn't the question. "Apple slices, please." "Good." Claire set an apple on the board, took the paring knife, and began cutting it into narrow, clean moons. "How was the history quiz?" June glanced at me first, then at Claire. "Okay, I think." Claire gave a soft hum of approval. "There you go." The apple knife clicked neatly against the board. The kitchen smelled of lemon cleaner and cold fruit and the faint stale mustard of my plate. I looked at June and wondered how many times I had heard her answer that way, how many times the word sorry had come in first and passed through me because I was busy admiring what I thought was good breeding. That evening the house felt wrong in ways too small to defend aloud. Not haunted, not menacing, simply arranged beyond comfort. I had always thought of the formal dining room as Evelyn's concession to old-fashioned decency. Though in truth, she disliked eating there except at holidays because, as she said, the room made peas seem political. Now, as I passed through with a stack of folded laundry for the upstairs hall, I noticed something I should have noticed before. Every chair was set in precisely the same relation to the table, except the one nearest the kitchen door. That one was tucked an inch farther back, just enough that a person sitting there would have to rise first to let others clear around her. I stood in the doorway with the towels in my arms and stared at the arrangement until I felt foolish. Evelyn had always been particular about chairs. Except no, not particular exactly. Aware. She once told me that people revealed themselves by the seats they chose when no one was assigning them, and after that, I had watched her at neighborhood dinners quietly clock a marriage from the way a husband claimed the chair with the best exit line while his wife settled herself between children and casserole. She cared about seating because she cared about people. There was a difference, and as with most things of hers, I had enjoyed the result more than I studied the intention. Downstairs, I heard June laugh once, just one note of it, then stop. Claire said something too low for me to catch. I put the laundry away and came back down slowly. The evening passed in the old family shape. Ben called after supper about porch furniture and mulch. Claire went over a school email with June in the den. I loaded the dishwasher, though Claire had already rinsed everything in a manner so efficient it erased whatever traces of eating had been left behind. By 9, the house smelled of dish soap and lamp heat and the cedar sachets Evelyn tucked into the hall closet each spring. I stood at the pantry corner before bed, with my hand on the edge of the shelf where she kept the recipe tin, and felt with a grief more complicated than the clean ache of missing her that I had spent 11 years loving a woman whose intelligence I had too often mistaken for temperament. The next morning, I got up before 6 and made coffee in the dark. It was one of the few hours the house still belonged to me in the old way. Before footsteps, before the mudroom calendar, before Claire's pencil taps and June's careful answers. The furnace had cut off 15 minutes earlier, and the quiet afterward lay over the kitchen like cool cloth. I stood at the sink and watched a line of dawn begin in the black window over the hydrangeas. The ring would not be ready until afternoon. That gave me a morning to think, which is to say, a morning to become worse company for myself. I took down Evelyn's blue crock of wooden spoons and wiped the counter, though it did not need wiping. Then I opened the pantry cupboard where she kept flour, sugar, baking powder, cinnamon, and the recipe tin with its bent lid. The flour canister was white enamel with a chipped black letter F she had bought at an antique mall for too much money, and defended by saying that ordinary things deserved dignity. Beside it sat the sugar bowl lid, perfectly turned now. The sight of that painted thistle tightened something in me. I opened the recipe tin. Cards yellowed at the edges, some in Evelyn's square hand, some inherited from women long dead whose cursive rose and fell like fences over hills. Oatmeal cookies, pot roast, lemon sheet cake, pancakes. I took out the pancake card because it was nearest the front, and because once a man begins suspecting the meaning of ordinary things, he will go first to the rituals that hurt most. Evelyn's recipe was hardly a recipe at all. Flour, baking powder, salt, sugar, eggs, milk, melted butter. A notation in the corner batter should look slightly indecisive. Under that, in smaller writing, 3 exclamation points beside "Don't overmix." She wrote as she spoke, as though fussiness could be sweetened into wit if you carried it with enough confidence. There at the bottom, almost as an afterthought, she had written in pencil, "Let her spill." I sat down. The card trembled once in my hand before I steadied it. Let her spill. It might have meant anything, a joke, a note to herself about children and batter, a shorthand memory of one specific morning. But my chest had already understood the sentence before the rest of me caught up. I could see Evelyn at the island in her blue apron, one hand on the mixing bowl, June beside her with a spoon too large for the task, Claire entering midway through the process to find flour on the counter and saying, half laughing, "Good Lord, what happened in here?" And Evelyn, cheerful, immediate, taking the room for herself before criticism could arrive. "We're making breakfast?" That's what. It isn't surgery. At the time, I had loved her for that kind of line. It made the house feel humane. Now I could not decide whether humanity had been exactly what she was defending. I put the pancake card back more carefully than I had taken it out and closed the tin. By 7, Claire came down dressed for work at the bank in charcoal slacks and a blouse the color of pale moss. She had always carried mornings like a woman with a clipboard in her chest. Even in pajamas, there was some sense of appointment to her, as though personal softness were a thing best scheduled. "Morning," she said. "Morning." She paused at the coffee station. "You're up early. Couldn't sleep. That makes 2 of us." June came down 10 minutes later, hair still damp from the shower shirt tucked too neatly into her skirt. She hovered beside the island until Claire looked up and said, "Sit, honey." At which point she climbed onto the same edge stool she always used, the one nearest the end, rather than the one beside me. I had never thought about that before. Children prefer certain places, that is all. But when I watched her settle now, it was not preference I saw, but a posture. She sat as if ready to rise. Not lounging, not occupying. Perched. "Orange juice?" Claire asked. June glanced toward her. "Sorry, yes, please." Claire poured it. "There's no reason to be sorry." But she said it in the same tone one might use to correct a child's napkin placement, tender on the surface, not truly open beneath. I buttered toast for myself and listened to the room. A house does have a language if you are willing to feel foolish long enough. Chairs speak. Cabinet doors speak. The pause before a spoon meets a bowl speaks. What I heard that morning was not terror. That would have been easier. It was adjustment. June moved with the reflexes of someone who expected tiny costs. When Claire left for work at 8, kissing June's head and telling her to remember choir forms, the room loosened by an almost invisible degree. It did not relax. That would be too simple. It loosened. June took a bigger bite of toast. Her shoulders lowered maybe half an inch. When she reached for the jam, she did it without speaking first. Then she caught herself, looked at me and said, "Do you want some?" "No, sweetheart." She nodded. Okay, no apology. The absence of it chilled me more than its presence had. I watched the back door close behind Claire through the narrow mudroom window. Car door, engine. The slight rumble as she backed out of the drive. Then quiet. June was still eating. "How's school been?" I asked. She shrugged one shoulder. "Fine. You like choir?" Another shrug smaller. "Mostly." What's mostly mean? For the first time in 2 days, something almost like a real 14-year-old expression crossed her face. "It means we sing too much boring church stuff, and Mrs. Devlin says altos are the backbone of civilization." That was so unexpectedly alive, I almost smiled. "Well, I said that sounds excessive." June gave a tiny snort, then looked startled by herself. And there it was again, the same sensation I had yesterday when Claire left the room for a phone call and June's body seemed to forget itself for a second. Not a different child, exactly. The same child permitted a little more breadth. "How'd the quiz really go?" I asked. She spread jam onto her toast in quick little strokes. "I missed one date." "That all? I think so." "You'll survive." "Yes, sir." She ate another bite. Then, as if something in her had overstepped, she added, "Sorry." "For what this time?" She looked down. "Nothing. I just—" She stopped. Her fingers tightened on the knife handle. I could see the thought work through her. Choose the right answer. "Don't prolong. Don't make the air heavy," I said very gently. "June, do you know why Grandma Evelyn might have said something like that?" Her eyes came up fast. Not blank. Alarmed. "What something? That you say sorry before you speak." The knife made a soft scrape against the toast crust. Then, no sound at all. "Did she say that?" June asked. The question itself told me too much and not enough. Arthur Bell mentioned it. She stared at me. The color changed in her face, not draining out, not flooding in, but pulling tighter as if something behind it had gone to brace. "I should finish getting ready," she said. "June!" She set the knife down. Very carefully. "I don't know." Then she stood, took her plate and glass to the sink before I could stop her, rinsed them, dried the counter where no drops had fallen, and left the room with her backpack moving quickly enough that the island stool rocked once behind her. I sat with my cooling coffee and heard Evelyn in memory as clearly as if she were at the counter behind me. Not from one grand scene. From a Tuesday in October 2 years ago when June had knocked over a measuring cup of milk while making waffles. Claire, in a blazer, already late, had come into the kitchen and gone still at the sight of milk running into the cracks of the butcher block. June had blurted, "Sorry, I'm sorry," and bent for towels. Evelyn, without even looking up from the batter bowl, had said, "Honey, if people never spilled milk." Half the paper towel business would collapse, then handed June a whisk and sent her to beat the eggs while she herself got down on one knee with the dishcloth. I had laughed from the coffee maker because it seemed like exactly the sort of line a decent woman used to keep mornings from turning petty. Now, sitting alone, I understood that Evelyn had not been protecting the counter. She had been protecting the child from the moral weather around the counter. The realization cost me more than the facts themselves. By noon, I found myself in the mudroom with the command wall in front of me and Claire's mechanical pencil in my hand. It was ridiculous, I knew that. A 67-year-old man standing in his own house like a trespasser before a family calendar. But once a doubt enters the structure of ordinary things, it recruits the smallest objects as accomplices. The calendar went back 6 months. Claire had layered paper over the old sheets rather than replacing the whole pad, which meant the previous months still hung behind April. I peeled March back, then February, January. Notes packed into each square in that narrow script. June orthodontist, parent meeting, early release, Tom cardio, choir rehearsal, Ben kids over the question mark, faint then crossed out. Nothing criminal, nothing dramatic. Yet as I looked, I began seeing not the existence of a system, but its density. Every day of the house translated into tiny management. The chore clipboard hung beneath it. Shared household rotation. Claire had titled it in block letters. It looked fair at first glance. Trash dishwasher, dog walks, except we had no dog. So that must have been from the apartment days and simply reused laundry. Fold wipe counters, sweep mudroom. Names marked in pencil. Mine appeared rarely because I ignored the sheet and did what needed doing when I saw it. Claire's tasks were managerial, intermittent. June's were daily small and constant. Clear island, reset stools, check table, wipe sink, refill napkin basket, put away mail, check table. I stared at that one a long time. I could hear Claire saying it in her voice. Just make sure the table's reset, honey. Nothing wrong with asking a child to help, nothing wrong with order. Yet why did a 14-year-old need a daily listed responsibility called check table in a house with 3 adults and 1 teenager? Why reset stools? Why refill napkin basket? Why did it matter enough to be written? I turned the page beneath and found January's sheet. Different tasks, same pattern. June's name more often, more maintenance, more surface care. A sound behind me made me turn. June stood in the hallway from school, backpack over one shoulder, hair coming loose around her face from the damp wind outside. "Sorry," she said immediately. "I didn't mean to scare you." My hand closed around the pencil. "You didn't." She looked at the clipboard, then at me. Not accusing, not curious, just alert in the way a child becomes alert when she senses adult attention has drifted somewhere unsafe. "I was just looking for the electric bill," I said. That was my second lie, and a poor one. June nodded anyway. "Mom puts it in the basket under junk mail." "Does she?" "Yes, sir." "Do you always call me sir?" She hesitated. "Mostly." "Why?" Another hesitation. Longer this time. Then from the driveway came the sound of Claire's car door slamming shut. June's face changed before any words did. Not fear exactly. Contraction. "She's home," she said, and bent immediately to straighten a pair of shoes on the tray that did not need straightening. Claire came through the back door carrying a canvas tote and her work shoes already half off, and the house slid back into place around her so quickly I felt it physically. A hinge catching. "You're home early," I said. Bank software update crashed half the afternoon. She set the tote on the bench and glanced not sharply but unmistakably from my face to the command wall and back. "Everything okay?" "Fine." June had moved to take the tote before Claire asked. Claire let her. Then Claire looked at the clipboard in my hand and smiled. "Were you actually using my system, or should I call the paper?" "I was looking for the electric bill," I said. "It's in the basket under junk mail," June said softly. Claire touched June's shoulder without looking at her. "Thank you, baby." There it was again, the answering for, the thanking on behalf, the invisible closing of the loop before it could widen into anything spontaneous. If I had not already been listening for it, I might still have called it good mothering. Instead, I said, "Arthur told me something strange yesterday." The room went very still. Claire eased one heel fully out of her shoe. "About the ring, yes." June's hand tightened on the tote handle. "What did he say?" Claire asked. I watched her face carefully, then perhaps for the first time in years. She did not blanch. She did not flinch. She simply grew more composed, which in Claire was often the truer sign. He said Evelyn asked him to remember something if I ever brought the ring in alone. Claire pulled the second shoe off and set both side by side on the tray. Did she? Yes. June was not breathing normally. I do not mean she stopped breathing. I mean I could hear the care in it now. What thing, Claire said. I held her eyes and discovered to my dismay that I still did not know whether I wanted her to deny it, explain it, or break apart in such a way that all my indecision would be relieved by ugliness. But ugly people do not always announce themselves with ugliness. Sometimes they remain entirely reasonable until reason itself becomes offense. He asked whether June still says sorry before she speaks. Silence. Claire's gaze flicked to June. Just once. But the speed of the glance was not the telling part. The telling part was June's body answering it before any words came. Then Claire smiled. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she said, half laughing. "That sounds exactly like Evelyn." She worried about June apologizing too much after the divorce. We all did. We all did. The phrase landed heavily because I could not remember worrying about it at all. Not specifically. Not enough to attach fear to it. "Did we?" I said. Claire's smile did not vanish. It altered temperature. "Tom, come on." That whole first year was rough. June was anxious. She said sorry to furniture. Evelyn took it to heart. That was all. June stood motionless beside the bench. I said, "Arthur said Evelyn was afraid." Claire's head tilted. "Of what?" She didn't tell him. Well, Claire let out a breath through her nose as if the world had offered her one more task in a week full of them. Then, with respect to Arthur and whatever old jeweler romance he's built around this, I don't know what to tell you. Evelyn loved June. She worried. She did not, unless I missed a truly dramatic chapter, secretly fear someone in this house. The answer was too smooth and too plausible, which is exactly why it worked against me for a moment. It might have been the truth. A grandparent worrying over a child's anxious habit, a trusted tradesman dramatizing after a death, a widower raw enough to read warning into good manners. I could feel the old shape of denial inviting me back into it. It even had decency on its side. Then June, without being asked, said, "I need to start my algebra," and moved toward the stairs with her backpack already in front of her like a shield. Claire called after her, "And your choir form, honey?" "I know. Do not forget." "I won't." When June was out of earshot, Claire turned to me. "Tom, I am not being unkind, but this is what grief does. It takes one odd sentence and starts building a house under it. Evelyn isn't here to clarify. Arthur shouldn't have said anything without context. If June had a bad habit after the divorce, she had a bad habit. Not every old worry is a crime." Her voice was calm, her face tender with strain. Any man less tired than I was might have accepted the rebuke and been grateful to have been corrected by someone more practical, but I had begun against my own preference to see the structure under the tone. "I didn't say crime," I answered. "No." Claire picked up her shoes and tote. "You didn't." That night, I did not sleep until after 2. I lay in the bed Evelyn and I had shared, listening to the house tick and settle around weather. The hallway nightlight cast a dull band across the carpet through the half-open bedroom door. The sheets smelled faintly of lavender because I still used the linen spray she made fun of in public and relied on in private. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw some small domestic scene rearranging itself under this new light. June clearing plates too fast, June glancing before answering, Evelyn turning pancake sundaes into mild chaos, Claire's hand aligning the pencil to the calendar edge. Sometime after midnight, I got up, put on my robe, and went downstairs. The first floor in darkness had always calmed me. At night, the house stopped pretending to be efficient and settled back into being old. The floors creaked where they wanted. The refrigerator sighed. The dining room held moonlight in hard silver shapes. I stood in the kitchen and did not turn on the overhead, only the small lamp by the cookbook shelf Evelyn used for late baking. The circle of light caught the pantry wallpaper lemons, the edge of the island the sugar bowl. I opened the drawer where I had kept the ring and looked at the empty pinch bowl there. Hollow space where gold had been. The absence felt strangely accusatory. Then I heard the whisper. Not from the stairs, from the den. A child's voice, low enough not to travel if the house had been deeper or newer. Another voice beneath it, Claire's, not raised, not angry, only flattened by effort. I moved through the dining room and stopped just short of the den doorway. I said, "I know," June whispered. "Then why is it still in your bag?" I forgot. That is not the same as forgetting, June. Silence. Look at me when I'm speaking to you. The words were not sharp. That was what made them cold. No hiss, no crack, just quiet insistence, the kind people praise as control. "I am looking," June said so softly I barely caught it. "No, you're looking past me. Do not do that. If there is a form, you bring it in. If there is homework, you say so. If you spill, you wipe it. If you need something, you ask, without making me drag it out of you. Do you understand? Yes." "Yes, what?" "Yes, Mom." Another silence. Then Claire again, softer still. "I am trying very hard, and I need you not to make ordinary life harder than it already is. There are some things that can be said loudly and mean little, and some things that can be said almost tenderly and leave marks all over a room." I stood in the dining room dark with my hand against the door casing and felt with a shame that spread hot and immediate through my chest that I had heard this sort of conversation before. Not this one. Not these exact words, but the structure of it. The small ledger of ordinary burdens laid at a child's feet, the conversion of every minor error into moral weight. I stepped back before either of them could see me. In the kitchen I stood motionless until I heard the den lamp click off and the stairs begin. First Claire's steps measured and even, then June's lighter and a fraction slower. The third stair clicked, a bedroom door. Another. I stayed where I was until the refrigerator kicked on. The next afternoon I went to Bell Jewelers for the ring. Arthur had polished the band, but not too brightly. Evelyn hated a ring that looked newly shined after years of wear, said it made marriage look dishonest. He set it on the black pad between us, and in the lamplight the gold seemed somehow older than it had before, as if repair had not restored it so much as clarified the record of everything it had survived. "The prong's secure now," he said. "Stone was fine. I left the scratches." "Thank you." He nodded. "There were records with it." I looked up. Arthur reached beneath the counter and brought out 3 narrow slips, their paper, the soft yellow of old receipts. Dates, services, resize, inspect, setting, check, prongs. One from just under 3 years ago, one a year later, one 10 months after that. In Arthur's compact handwriting near the bottom of the middle slip, 2 words I could not decipher from where I stood. "I shouldn't keep notes the way I do," he said. "It's a bad habit from my father. But sometimes memory is a weaker clerk than paper." He handed me the slips. The date on the first one was the week after Claire and June moved in. The second was in October, around the time of the milk spill memory. The third was the spring after that. On the middle slip beneath check sizing, Arthur had written per customer request ask. About girl. I felt my pulse in the back of my throat. "She asked you to note that. She asked me not to forget." I looked up from the paper. "Why didn't you tell me there were records yesterday?" "Because yesterday you looked like a man trying very hard not to hear a sentence that had already entered his life." He said it without cruelty. "Today you look like a man who may need paper." I folded the slips and slipped them into my wallet behind my license. "What did she look like?" I asked those times she brought it. Arthur considered. Determined once, distracted once. The last time tired. And very careful about sounding casual. Did she say anything else? Only that people mistake good manners for safety every day. I closed my fingers around the ring. There, standing under the jewelry lamp with the black pad under my hand and the old clock ticking somewhere behind Arthur's shoulder, the ring changed in me. It was no longer the piece of Evelyn I had failed to put away. It was evidence that my wife had been using her own marriage as a way to leave the house long enough to think or speak or breathe somewhere that did not immediately absorb what she said and turn it back into household weather. A wedding ring had become not only a sign of love, but an exit, a witness, a coded message carried in plain sight. That cost me more than I expected. I had not realized until then how much of my grief depended on the comfort that Evelyn's life with me, whatever else it had lacked, had at least been unambiguous in its safety. I put the ring in my palm and closed my fist around it. Arthur's voice gentled. "Tom." I looked up. "If you are asking yourself why she didn't tell you plainly," he said, "I would not hurry to answer for her or against yourself. People protect access to children in whatever broken ways they can." I nodded once because speaking had gone temporarily out of reach. At home that evening, I found the house preparing for dinner. It is an odd phrase, but the only accurate one. Not dinner being prepared. The house. Claire at the stove with chicken breasts browning in the skillet. June setting the dining room table. The hum of the dishwasher. The smell of rosemary and hot oil. The napkin basket on the sideboard. Salt cellar out. Water pitcher sweating onto a little ring of cork. The formal room lit, though it was only Tuesday, and not one of us genuinely preferred eating there except Claire, who liked what she called a reset at the end of the day. June moved around the table in white socks, setting forks, then stepping back to adjust them so all tines lined evenly with the placemat edge. She saw me in the doorway and straightened. "Hi, Grandpa." "Hi." Her voice always had two versions now, one for free air, one for watched air. This was the watched one. "Need anything?" I asked. "No, thank you." The chair nearest the kitchen door was again slightly farther back than the others. "Why do you always sit there?" I asked. She glanced at the chair, then at me, then toward the kitchen where Claire was moving the skillet. "It's just where I sit. Do you like it?" "It's fine." Fine. The most frightened, useful word in the American house. Claire called from the kitchen. "June, check the water glasses, please." "Okay." She did. Every glass, every rim, every place. I went to the sideboard and set my wallet down. The folded slips inside it felt hotter than paper ought to. During dinner, I began for perhaps the first time in my own home to watch everyone as if I had not been among them for years. Claire served portions without asking preferences because she already knew them. She corrected June's napkin once by simply smoothing it flatter with 2 fingers after June had set it across her lap. She thanked me for bringing in the mail and thanked June for remembering the water pitcher, though I had not seen June forget it once in months. June ate neatly, answered in small, complete sentences, and rose first when plates were only half finished around the table. "Sit down," I said. 3 heads lifted. "I can clear," June said. "So can I." Claire's smile appeared. "She doesn't mind." I didn't ask if she minded. The smile held. Not harder. Smoother. June stood uncertainly with her plate in both hands. "Set it back down," I said. She did, but so carefully it was almost a lowering of herself rather than china. Ben called midway through the meal, and I let it go to voicemail because the room already felt too balanced on small edges. Claire went on speaking about bank software, a woman from Church June's choir concert. Ordinary things. All the while I watched June touch her water glass, only after Claire did answer only when directly asked, and say, "Sorry" twice, once when her fork clicked louder than she intended, once when she asked me to pass the pepper. After supper, while Claire was upstairs taking a call from her attorney, I found myself at the dining room sideboard opening the drawer, where Evelyn kept spare candles, place cards, and old receipts she hadn't sorted yet. I had no business there except that grief and suspicion had begun sharing a nervous system in me. No dark family secret waited, no dramatic note. Instead, there were the kinds of papers a house accumulates because life refuses to stay elegant. Takeout menus, appliance manuals, tags from gift towels, an old dentist reminder card, a school handbook page, and beneath them all a printout email folded in thirds. The top line showed the name Marlene Keating. My stomach tightened before I read a word. It was addressed to Claire, copied to Evelyn from 2 years earlier. Claire, I appreciate your time today. I understand your view that June is sensitive by temperament, but I want to reiterate my concern that her self-correcting language and immediate apologizing may be reflecting chronic anxiety around disappointing primary adults, rather than simple post-divorce adjustment. In school, she is consistently high-functioning and unusually eager to preempt correction. I may be overreading, but I would encourage a home environment where mistakes are not managed too quickly or too morally. I read it twice. At the bottom in Claire's handwriting was a note in pencil, handled /overreach. The paper shook in my hands enough that I had to set it down on the sideboard and flatten it with my palm. Evelyn had been copied, which meant she had not simply fretted in abstraction. A school counselor had named at least part of what she saw, and Claire had folded the page into a drawer, under candles and place cards, and written overreach on it, as if filing away a woman's professional concern were the same thing as balancing a checkbook. The pain of that went somewhere older in me than outrage. It went to the part that had once admired Claire's competence because it spared the rest of us from the burden of particulars. It went to every family dinner where I had looked at a smooth evening and thought with foolish gratitude, we've come through the hard years. My own voice behind me would have startled me less than Claire's did. What are you doing? I turned. She stood in the dining room doorway in stocking feet, phone in one hand, expression unreadable. I found this, I said. Her eyes flicked to the paper, then back to me. Oh, she said. That. Yes. That. Claire came into the room. Not quickly. She closed the distance at the pace of a woman entering a bank office after hours, prepared to explain another person's overreaction without raising her own pulse. Marlene Keating worried about everything she said. That was her professional style. She copied Evelyn. Yes. And you didn't think that mattered? Claire looked at the page, then sat one of the candles straighter in the drawer before pushing it half shut. Even now. Even there. An instinct to align before answer. I thought it mattered in proportion, she said. June was anxious. The divorce was ugly. Her father was erratic. She needed steadiness. Marlene preferred feelings to structure. Mistakes are not managed too quickly or too morally, I read aloud. That could apply to half the mothers in Ohio. Could it? Yes. Claire's tone changed not in volume, but in temperature. Tom, if you want to know whether I demanded too much neatness after dragging my daughter through a humiliating divorce and into another person's house, the answer is probably yes. If you want to turn one counselor email and one jeweler's memory into something darker because grief has finally gotten tired of sitting still, then I don't know how to help you. I stared at her. The room behind her still held the smell of rosemary and dish soap. June was somewhere upstairs, footsteps crossing the back bedroom and stopping. The whole house seemed to be listening. What did Evelyn say to you about this? I asked. Claire held my gaze. She thought I was hard on June. And I was her mother. That was not an answer, which may be why it sounded to some part of me like a confession. Did Evelyn ever say she was afraid of you? I asked. For the first time, truly. For the first time, something raw flashed across Claire's face. Afraid of me, she repeated very softly. The softness was worse than if she had snapped. She told Arthur Bell she was afraid of someone at home. Claire's lips parted, closed. Then she gave one short, disbelieving laugh. Arthur Bell, she said. A jeweler. This is what we're doing. I'm asking, and I'm answering. She stepped closer enough that I could smell her hand cream beneath the dish soap. No, Tom. Evelyn was not afraid of me. Evelyn thought I was exacting, controlling, tired, occasionally impossible, and doing my best. Which, incidentally, is how most mothers look from a safe enough distance. I wanted to believe her because some forms of pain are harder than lies. If Claire was telling the truth, then I was a grieving old man rummaging through drawers and assigning malice to all the wrong people. If she was not telling the truth, then the lie had been eating dinner in my house for years. What's the opposite of exacting, I said. What? What's the opposite of exacting in a child? Claire did not answer at once. Then, neglect. No. My voice was quieter than hers. No. The opposite of exacting in a child is ease. Something in her face shifted then, not because the line was brilliant. It was not, but because for 1 second she understood that I was no longer speaking the old family language with her. I was no longer admiring structure on sight. June's feet sounded on the stairs. Claire stepped back at once, and with that single movement, the room repapered itself in ordinary domestic tones. By the time June appeared, Claire had smoothed her expression into gentle fatigue. "Grandpa," June said from the doorway. "Do you know where my choir form is?" Claire answered before I could. "Mudroom basket under the grocery flyer." June nodded. "Thank you." Claire smiled at her. "Bring it to me when you find it." June went. I looked at Claire, and she looked back, and between us lay a folded counselor email. An old house. My dead wife's silence and the uneasy beginning of the knowledge that whatever peace had existed here had required too much management to deserve the name. The next morning, I called the number on the email. Marlene Keating answered on the third ring with the voice of a woman who had spent 20 years teaching frightened people to make room for one more sentence. When I gave my name, there was a small pause. "I remember, June," she said. "I hoped you might. I'm not sure how much I can responsibly say after this much time. I'm not asking you to be irresponsible." Another pause. Paper rustling faintly on her end. Then, did something happen? I looked through the kitchen doorway to the island where June's untouched cereal bowl from 10 minutes earlier still sat, because Claire had driven her to school after a forgotten permission slip, and I had for once left the bowl where it was. "My wife is dead," I said. "And I'm beginning to think she saw something in this house that I didn't." Marlene did not offer sympathy first. She offered seriousness, which was better. "Can you come in?" she asked. Her office was not in the school anymore. She rented 2 rooms above a physical therapy clinic on Main with a waiting chair upholstered in a fabric trying hard to be cheerful, and a little side table bearing magazines no one had read honestly since 2018. Through the wall I could hear exercise bands snapping lightly in the clinic below. Marlene herself was smaller than I expected and grayer, with reading glasses on a chain, and the kind of stillness that comes either from wisdom or long practice, pretending to it, until the two become indistinguishable. She gestured me into the chair opposite her desk. "I remember June very clearly," she said once we had sat. "That's not common for the record. Most children blur after enough years." She did not. Why, Marlene folded her glasses and set them on a yellow legal pad. Because she was one of those children adults praise constantly and worry about too little. I said nothing. She was bright, prepared, clean, calm, never disruptive. If she forgot an assignment, she apologized before I even asked the question. If another child bumped into her, she said sorry first. If she cried, she apologized for that too. My throat tightened. I saw anxious children every day, Marlene went on. June was different, not more dramatic, less. She seemed to be living half a beat ahead of correction. The exactness of that made me close my eyes briefly. "I sent the email," she said, "not because I thought anyone was abusing her in some overt criminal sense. I need to be very careful here, but I was concerned about what kind of home life teaches a child to manage herself that completely." "She lived with my daughter," I said. "And your wife?" "Yes." Marlene nodded slowly. "Your wife came to one meeting. She mostly listened. I remember that very well too." A pulse moved in my temple. What did she say? Very little in front of Claire. Marlene's mouth tightened just a fraction. Afterward, in the parking lot, she asked me whether children can learn to apologize before they even know what they've done. I said yes. I stared at her. She looked. Marlene said carefully, like a woman trying to understand how much she was allowed to name. The office was quiet, except for the muted sounds below and the heating vent ticking behind me. I thought of Evelyn in that parking lot, coat, button, purse on her arm, car keys in hand, asking a school counselor a question she could not yet bring herself to ask her husband plain. The image hurt in a new place, not because it made her secretive, because it made her lonelier. I found your email in a drawer, I said. That doesn't surprise me. Why not? Marlene met my eyes. There was no drama in her expression, which made what she said next feel heavier than any accusation. Because adults who need the house to look functional often file away the first thing that threatens the story. She paused. Mr. Hale, I want to be scrupulous here. I cannot tell you what happened in your home. I can only tell you what I observed in a child, and children who feel safe do not apologize before telling the truth. I sat in Marlene Keating's office long enough after she said it that the room itself began to feel embarrassed for me. Children who feel safe do not apologize before telling the truth. A better man might have asked the right follow-up immediately. Might have pressed for dates, examples, patterns, anything he could carry home and stack into reason. What I did instead was sit there with my hands on my knees and feel the sentence move through my life, looking for all the places it should have found resistance and had not. Marlene watched me without crowding me. That, too, I noticed in a new way. People who are accustomed to frighten children learn not to rush silence. I need to say this plainly, she said at last. I am not telling you your daughter is monstrous. I am not telling you something sensational happened behind closed doors. I am telling you I saw a child who behaved as if small mistakes carried too much moral consequence. I nodded once, and I saw adults around her interpreting that as maturity. This time I did not nod, because that one belonged not to Claire. It belonged to me. I had said those exact words, not in those exact syllables perhaps, but enough near them to make no meaningful difference. June's so mature. She's easy. Sweet kid, not a lick of trouble in her. I had thought I was praising a child. Now, sitting under fluorescent office light, with the school counselor's old concerns spread invisibly between us, I could hear my own voice as part of the weather that had made the child necessary to herself. Did Evelyn think it was Claire? I asked. Marlene's expression changed very slightly. Not surprise. Caution deepening. Your wife did not give me names. But she thought it was home. She thought the child's anxiety was being reinforced at home. That isn't the same as home. No, Marlene said. It isn't. I looked at her. She looked back. In older age, there are certain decencies one begins to value more than comfort, and one of them is this: when another adult lets you arrive at the humiliating shape of your own thought without pretending they said it first. Did she seem afraid of Claire? I asked. Marlene exhaled softly. She seemed careful with Claire. Something cold and level moved through me. Careful how she deferred in ways that did not match her actual judgment. It was such a clean sentence. Professional, observed, reasonable. Nothing about it belonged in a thriller or a courtroom or one of those daytime talk shows where family disaster is made to clap for itself under bright lights. And because it was so reasonable, it went deeper. I thanked her. I do not remember exactly how. I know I stood up because my knees complained. I know she walked me to the door and said that if I needed to talk again, she would prefer I not wait until the situation became more rigid than it already was. I know I stepped out into an afternoon so ordinary, it looked offensive. Sun on windshields, a woman in scrubs carrying iced coffee. 2 teenage boys arguing over a ball cap in the parking lot. The world continuing in its cheap, persistent habit of not rearranging itself around private revelation. I sat in my car with the door shut and my hands still on the wheel and did not start the engine. There are moments in a man's life when the moral fact of himself alters faster than his memory can keep pace. I had walked into Marlene's office as a widower chasing a bad feeling. I came out as a man who had been given more than once information about a child and had placed it under the category of female worry because the house was functioning and because deep down I preferred the dignity of order to the labor of naming who had paid for it. That is not the sort of sentence a man wants to be able to write about himself. It remained true anyway. I drove home slowly. The first floor was empty when I came in through the back. Claire's car was not in the drive. June's backpack was in its cubby, which meant school had ended and someone had come home, but the kitchen held no one. The house had that in-between stillness it gets in late afternoon when daylight is thinning, but lamps have not yet been turned on. The air smelled faintly of apples and dishwasher heat. I set my keys down and stood in the mudroom. The command wall faced me in its familiar efficiency calendar, clipboards, pencil basket, a small magnet in the shape of a loaf of bread that Evelyn once bought at a church bazaar, because she said if one had to make a command center, at least it should contain a useless miracle. I used to find the wall reassuring. A map of responsibility. Proof that somebody in the house had a handle on daily life. Now it looked different. Not sinister exactly. Worse than sinister, because sinister at least announces itself as other. The wall looked competent, helpful, necessary. And beneath that, with the force of Marlene's sentence still in my ribs, I could see how much of the house had been taught to pass through it first. June's choir form clipped under Thursday. Ben's barbecue invitation from last month still tucked under respond. A note in Claire's hand asked June about history packet. Another remind Tom medications. Another clean-out mudroom bin. Another smaller in the right margin where there had been no reason for me ever to notice it before watch tone at dinner. I leaned closer. The words were in Claire's mechanical pencil hand. Small, not underlined, not emphasized, not framed by arrows or marks that would suggest alarm. Just there. One more domestic notation among 7 others. Watch tone at dinner. It could have meant anything. It could have meant hers. It could have meant June's. Mine. Some memory of a previous conversation. Yet in the context of everything else, the phrase stood there like a wire running through plaster. I took out my phone and photographed the wall. The act itself shook me a little. Not because photographs are dramatic, but because until that moment I had still been walking around my own house with the inward posture of a man hoping things would yield to sorrow if he simply looked hard enough. Taking the picture meant crossing into a smaller, less merciful category of living. It meant I no longer trusted memory to carry what I was seeing. It meant the house had become something to document. From upstairs came a floorboard. I slid the phone back into my pocket and moved into the kitchen just as June came down the back stair with a load of folded laundry in her arms. She stopped when she saw me, then resumed carefully. "Hi, Grandpa." "Hi." She set the towels in a neat stack on the island, then immediately squared the edges of the stack with both hands. "Where's your mom's store?" "What for?" She shrugged. "Chicken broth and lemons." I almost asked why lemons, as if I still believed in the old categories of harmless detail. Instead, I said, "Need help with the rest of that?" "No, thank you." Then after the tiniest pause, "Sorry. I mean, thank you." The correction hurt worse than the original apology. I said, "June, can you sit for a minute?" Her eyes went to the mudroom door, then back to me. "I have algebra. You can have algebra in 10 minutes. She did not sit right away. She looked toward the stairs, the front hallway, the back door. Then she climbed onto the edge stool nearest the end of the island and folded her hands in her lap. I remained standing because I wanted her to have the seated ground, if ground was what she needed. "How'd choir go yesterday?" I asked. She blinked, surprised by the harmlessness of it. "Fine. Mrs. Devlin still believes altos hold up civilization." A tiny smile. "Yes. Sounds exhausting for the alto." That got a breath that was almost a laugh. Then gone. I rested my hands on the island. "June, when Grandma Evelyn made pancakes on Sundays. Did you like that?" She looked at me in the quick, searching way children do when they suspect a question has another question folded inside it. Yes. Why another searching look? Because she made the kitchen messy. I felt something in me go very still. Messy how June glanced toward the back door again. Just messy. Messy how sweetheart. Her fingers found the elastic band on her wrist and pulled at it once. She didn't care if flour got everywhere. There it was, not a mystery, not a confession, a child's memory of one room where error had not turned moral. Did your mother mind that I asked? June's head came up quickly. Her eyes widened, not with guilt, but with a sort of immediate internal recoil. I didn't say she minded. I know, I'm asking. The elastic snapped lightly against her skin. She likes things cleaned up. There are whole family histories inside sentences that simple. Before I could go further, the back door opened. The speed with which June's hands left the elastic and returned flat to her lap would have been invisible to anyone not already looking for it. She did not jump. She did not flinch. She resumed herself. Claire came in with 2 grocery bags looped over one arm and the expression of a woman who has spent $12 too much on lemons and intends to carry it as patience. You're talking, she said pleasantly. We are. Good. She set the bags on the counter and began unloading with efficient little thumps. Carton of broth. Lemons, celery, crackers. June, did you finish the laundry? Almost. Claire held up a lemon. Would you mind rinsing these? June slid off the stool immediately. Okay. The moment ended without ending, which was the way most things ended in that house. I stood there, watching the 3 of us become our ordinary arrangement again. Claire at the counter. June at the sink, me a little to one side near the coffee station, and understood for the first time how much family life can be staged not through spectacle but through sequence. Who moves first? Who answers first? Who yields the center of the room without appearing to? If you lived inside those small exchanges long enough, they could become the architecture of reality. That night I called Ben and asked him to come by after dinner. He arrived around 8 with sawdust still in the cuff of his jeans and the smell of cold air and lumber on his jacket. He came in through the back as always, kissed my cheek the way he had begun doing after Evelyn died, because he was old enough now not to care whether men are supposed to keep certain distances from tenderness, and looked once around the kitchen before asking, "Where is everybody?" Claire's upstairs with her attorney. June's supposed to be showering. He nodded. Good. We went out to the back porch and shut the door behind us. The March evening had gone hard and blue. The yard smelled of wet mulch and old leaves, and somewhere 2 houses over, a dog kept giving the sort of half-hearted bark that means it has not yet decided if it wants to be a problem. I told him about Marlene. The parking lot conversation with Evelyn, the email, the command wall note, the pancake cart. Ben listened with his hands in his jacket pockets and his head slightly down the way he always had when he was trying to contain a reaction until the useful part emerged first. When I finished, he let out a long breath. Dad. I know. No, I don't think you do. I looked at him. He leaned one shoulder against the porch post. You want the truth? The house has felt too tight for a while. The words went through me cleanly, not because they were dramatic, because they landed in the exact place where I had spent years making excuses. How long is a while? He rubbed the back of his neck. Long enough that Emily and I started doing shorter visits. I stared at him. You never said that. You never asked. The answer came without heat, which made it worse. And if I'd said it out of nowhere, what would you have done? Told me Claire was under strain. Told me Evelyn knew how to handle her. Told me blended families are complicated and everybody's trying. The thing about children, even grown children, is that when they finally tell you a truth they have been organizing around for years, they do not need to raise their voices. They have already done the labor without you. Did Evelyn say anything to you, I asked. Ben was quiet long enough that I knew the answer before he gave it. Not directly, he said. She once told me June seemed most relaxed on Sunday mornings before Claire was fully awake. The back porch shifted under me without moving. I sat down in the old wicker chair because suddenly standing felt over-ambitious. Why didn't you tell me that Ben looked out toward the yard? Because she said it like an observation, not an accusation. And because you were so damn grateful when the house had a week with no friction that I couldn't tell whether you didn't see it or couldn't afford to. There are sentences sons earn. That was one of them. I looked at my hands. Age-spotted, broad, useless in so many of the ways that mattered most. I thought peace meant we were getting somewhere, I said. Ben's laugh held no amusement in it. I think peace meant everybody knew where Claire's line was. We sat in the cold long enough for the porch railing to gather damp. From inside came the muffled sound of Claire moving across the kitchen cabinet door, running water, a drawer closing. Even from out there, the house sounded managed. Did you ever see her do anything, I asked. He considered. Depends what counts as anything. Try me. He shifted his weight. Nothing you could call into the police, if that's what you mean. No bruises, no screaming, nothing cinematic, just... He searched for the word and didn't find one tidy enough. Correction. Constant correction. June dropped a fork once, and Claire made her tell the whole table what she should have done differently before she could get another one. At Thanksgiving, Lily spilled cider, and Claire looked at June first as if somehow the right person to absorb the embarrassment had to be identified. At Christmas Eve dinner, 2 years ago, June reached for the rolls before the bowl came all the way around, and Claire said real soft, "Wait your turn, baby, we aren't animals." And I watched June sit back like she'd been touched. The cold on the porch deepened, or maybe I simply noticed it more. "I remember Christmas Eve," I said. "I'm sure you do." I did. I remembered the silver napkin rings Evelyn found at an estate sale and polished in front of an old movie. Remembered how good the prime rib smelled. Remembered thinking Claire seemed almost relaxed that night because she was talking more than usual and had let June help carry the salad without correcting her grip on the bowl. I remembered seeing June sit back after reaching toward the rolls. I had not remembered the line. No, that was not true. I had remembered the line. I had simply filed it under holiday tension, one more harmless sharpness among women and daughters, and the 1,000 little frictions of a multi-generational table. I should have heard it, I said. Ben looked at me, then direct and tired. "Yes," he said. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, something in me had shifted from self-condemnation into a harder place. Not cleaner. Harder. Shame can become one more way of protecting oneself from action if you kneel in it long enough. I loved Evelyn. I had failed June. Both things were true. Neither relieved me of the next thing. "I'm going to need your help," I said. Ben's jaw tightened once. Then he nodded. "With what?" "With not being crazy if I'm not. And with being useful if I am." A shadow of the old half-smile crossed his face. "I can do at least one of those." "Both. Probably both." I looked back through the kitchen window. Claire stood at the sink with her back to us, one hand braced on the counter, head bent as if reading something on her phone. In the reflection, I could see June crossing the mudroom behind her with a stack of school books, pausing automatically until Claire shifted far enough for the path to clear. "Sunday," I said. "What about Sunday?" She always made pancakes on Sundays. Ben followed my gaze into the house. "I remember. I want everybody in the kitchen." He turned back to me. "You're thinking confrontation already. I'm thinking there's a pattern in that room, and I'm done letting it pass for personality." That was the first deliberate move I made. Not a dramatic one, only a decision, but houses like men can turn on decisions more quietly than they turn on force. Over the next 2 days I began to keep track, not on paper lying out where anyone could find it. In the Notes app on my phone and later on a legal pad, I slid under my undershirts in the dresser drawer upstairs. Date, time, behavior. Not because I suddenly believed myself a detective, because I had finally learned what happens when decent men trust memory more than pattern. Thursday, 7:18 a.m. June asks for orange juice. Sorry, could I have... Claire says there's no need to apologize in a corrective tone. June withdraws request halfway, then reformulates. Thursday, 4:42 p.m. Claire thanks me on June's behalf for bringing home printer paper before June can answer directly. Thursday, 6:11 p.m. June starts to sit at island center stool. Claire asks her to slide down so Grandpa can have more room, though there is ample space. June moves to edge stool. Thursday, 8:03 p.m. Hallway, Claire to June behind closed den door. Tell me exactly what the teacher said, not what you think she meant. Each note cost me something. Not because the items were large, because once written they ceased being impressions. They became the shape of daily life in my house. And the house, meanwhile, kept teaching me itself. The formal dining room had always seemed too polished for its own good. Now it looked almost accusatory. Every dinner there turned June into a function. Napkins straight, water filled, chairs reset, centerpiece aligned after anyone brushed it. Claire was never openly harsh in that room. She hardly needed to be. The room did some of the work for her. It had the stale authority of furniture brought into line long before the current occupants deserved it. The mudroom became worse, not because it changed, but because I saw it properly. That command wall was not just organization. It was a checkpoint between feeling and action. If a form existed, it went there. If a meal changed, it went there. If a mood needed managing, there was apparently even a note for that. I found 2 more penciled directives in margins over the next day: no backtalk and ask about packet. Nothing outrageous, no language any court would gasp over, only a domestic system translated into little administrative ghosts. The den became the room I disliked most after dark. Not because anything happened there that I could yet prove, but because voices flattened inside it. Claire liked to go over things there with June's schoolwork forms, forgotten tasks, tone. The lamp by the armchair cast a warm puddle over the rug and the bookshelves, and from the hallway all you ever heard was calm. That was the trick. Calm can be the most menacing sound in a family if it arrives only after a child has learned what volume costs. Friday night gave me the scene I still cannot think of without feeling my pulse change. I had been upstairs in my bedroom going through the cedar chest at the foot of the bed, looking for nothing in particular and everything at once. The chest held winter blankets, 2 old photo albums, Evelyn's first apron, and a stack of kitchen towels she had been saving because the cloth was better than what stores sold now. I found between the second album and a folded baby blanket from Ben's infancy a long white envelope. Inside was a camp incident form from 2 summers ago. I sat on the rug with it in my lap and read. Minor injury during canoe transfer. Camper startled by raised adult voice nearby stepped backward. Off dock edge, sustained bruising to shin and hand. Guardian contacted. No follow-up needed. Guardian contacted. In the margin in Evelyn's hand, only 2 words, not nearby. The room seemed to narrow around me. I remembered that camp week. Claire had said June embarrassed herself by panicking on a dock after another girl fell. Said June had always been too high-strung around public mishaps. Evelyn had disagreed mildly, said children don't embarrass themselves, they get scared, or they don't, and the matter had gone no further, because I had let it go no further. Now, with the form in my hand, and Evelyn's penciled contradiction there like a pulse from the grave, I understood she had known the story Claire told did not match the event. The floorboard outside the bedroom creaked. I looked up. The hall beyond the half-open door was empty. Then, from downstairs, I heard Claire's voice. Not raised, calling my name. Tom. I slipped the form back into the envelope and stood too fast, the blood shifting in my head. In here, I called. Her footsteps came up the stairs, measured, unhurried, intimate with every board. She stopped in the doorway and took in the cedar chest open at my feet, The albums, the blanket, the envelope half hidden under a towel. "What are you doing?" she asked. The question again. It had become her domestic equivalent of a pressure gauge, looking through things. For what? My own wife, mostly. Something moved in her expression. Not guilt. Irritation at losing control of tone. I didn't know grief came with such a strong archival impulse. Maybe it comes with delayed eyesight. That landed. I saw it land. Claire went very still in the doorway, one hand resting lightly on the trim. "Do you want to tell me what that means?" she asked. I held the envelope in my hand, but not visibly enough for her to read it. The bedroom behind me smelled of cedar and old cotton and the faint, stale sweetness of Evelyn's face powder, still clinging to a scarf in the drawer. I was suddenly aware of the whole house beneath us. Den lamp on mudroom dark kitchen, clean enough to pass inspection. June somewhere downstairs with algebra or a shower or both, the command wall just beyond the back stair. The island, the pantry, the breakfast room where so much of my ignorance had once sat and called itself love. I think I said slowly that a number of things I took for ordinary weren't ordinary at all. Claire studied me. Then she stepped into the room and shut the door behind her. That was the memorable scene, though I did not know it then. Not because of what was said, because of the quiet. Her shutting the bedroom door in that old house with its winter-thin walls and its grieving furniture and the cedar chest open at my feet made the room feel for the first time in my married life used against me. "I need you to be very careful," she said. "No heat, no threat anybody else would hear. Only calm. So much calm it blanched the air. About what? About deciding stories before you know what they cost." I looked at her and thought with perfect clarity this is what frightened Evelyn. Not shouting, not violence. Cost. "You mean what they cost you," I said. Her lips thinned. "I mean what they cost June. She's already paying. For what Claire took another step into the room, for having a mother who asks her to think, for being held to a standard, for not being raised in chaos. Is that the crime now? Children aren't military academies, Claire. No, they're not. And homes aren't campgrounds either, no matter how fond Evelyn was of calling mess freedom. There it was, not rage. Contempt, finally slipping one shoulder out from under the cardigan. My hand tightened around the envelope. She was trying to protect June. Claire gave a small, genuinely baffled shake of the head. "From what? A folded towel. A completed form. Not making a public spectacle of every feeling, from you making mistakes, feel like moral failures." Silence. Then Claire smiled. Not because anything was funny, because some people smile when they have decided the room now belongs to them. "You really believe that?" she said. "I'm beginning to. And you think Evelyn what secretly built little flower sanctuaries against my tyranny?" Her voice remained almost conversational. "Tom, do you hear yourself? The worst part is that I did. I heard how absurd it could sound, stripped of its daily context. That was the power of it. The system depended on every separate piece being defensible. Only the whole was unbearable." She asked a jeweler to remember a sentence I said. She kept forms. She wrote notes. Marlene Keating worried. Ben felt the house was too tight. I'm done being the only person who didn't see the pattern. At Ben's name, something flickered. "Of course, Ben," she said softly. "He has always preferred women he doesn't have to answer to." I almost answered that. Instead, I looked at her and saw, maybe for the first time in my life, my daughter and a stranger occupying the same face. "You should leave the room," I said. She held my gaze another second. Then she opened the door. At the threshold, she paused without turning back. "Whatever you decide to do," she said, "do not confuse your guilt with wisdom. It makes men very dangerous to children." Then she went downstairs. I stood in the cedar-smelling room with the camp form in my hand and understood two things at once. First, that Claire knew I was no longer merely grieving in circles. Second, that patience alone would not surface the truth safely. The moment had passed where observation could pretend to be neutral. She had felt me looking, which meant June was in greater danger now, not because I had raised my voice or slammed a fist, but because systems of control do not like witnesses once the witnessing becomes intentional. That was the second deliberate move I made. I called Ben from the bedroom and told him to come Sunday morning before 8. No explanation over the phone. Just come. Bring Emily if you can leave the kids with her mother. Then I called Marlene and asked whether if things became immediate, she would be willing to speak to a family law colleague or emergency placement contact. She said yes. No drama. Only yes and a list of steps and the kind of measured urgency that made me feel both steadier and more ashamed of how long I had needed it. Saturday moved like a house, trying not to show where it hurt. Claire was all ease. More ease than before, which frightened me worse. She made muffins in the morning and left one beside my coffee without comment. She praised June's history grade. She asked whether I still planned to go to Lily's spring thing next week. She mentioned the weather. She cleaned the refrigerator shelf with lemon water and left the kitchen smelling falsely innocent. June, on the other hand, seemed to thin in place, not visibly to a stranger, only to someone now paying the sort of attention he should have paid years earlier. She spoke less, moved faster, watched doors. I kept notes in my pocket all day and did not touch them where anyone could see. At noon, Claire asked if I wanted to help with the linen closet, and I said no. At 2, she said June had forgotten to text a friend back, and that kind of carelessness becomes character if you aren't careful. At 4, when June accidentally knocked a stack of folded napkins sideways in the dining room, Claire said nothing at all. That was worse. June righted the stack with trembling fingers and apologized to the air. The house had become actively hostile by then, not because anything supernatural had entered it, but because every room carried a doubled meaning. The kitchen was where Evelyn had built refuge. The dining room was where compliance looked prettiest. The mudroom was administrative control disguised as help. The den was calm, used as pressure. Even the back porch, once merely a place for hydrangea talk and Ben's beer on summer evenings, had turned witness stand in my mind. Saturday night, while Claire was in the shower and June was upstairs, I stood in the pantry corner with Evelyn's blue apron in my hands. I had not let myself do that since the funeral. The cloth smelled faintly of old soap and something underneath it that might have been her or might have been only memory pretending to have a body. I pressed the pocket lining between finger and thumb, the striped cloth she had sewn in, and for the first time since all this began, I let myself ask her aloud the question I'd been asking everywhere else in silence. Why didn't you tell me plain? The kitchen being a kitchen offered no answer. The refrigerator hummed. Pipes ticked. A car passed outside on Oakview, but memory did, because memory is crueler and kinder than haunting. I saw her one Sunday at the Island Flower on her forearm. June laughing at some absurdly misshapen pancake, Claire coming in halfway through and stopping at the sight of the mess. Evelyn had looked up and said light as church bells. You know what this kitchen needed? A complete collapse of standards. Claire had smiled thinly. I had laughed. Then Evelyn had looked at me not long, not secretly, just long enough now in recollection for me to understand that she had been checking whether I would help hold the room with her. I had not intentionally. I had smiled and reached for syrup. I had enjoyed the warmth she generated and let her pay for it. That was the point where my grief turned not into rage exactly, but into service. Sunday needed to happen, not because confrontation is noble, because by Saturday night, I understood the house would go on arranging itself around Claire's requirements forever, unless someone broke sequence in the room where sequence had ruled. I slept in clothes. At 5:30, I woke before the alarm and went downstairs in the dark. The kitchen at that hour belonged to no one's performance. That was the mercy of it. The floor cool under my feet. The window above the sink still black except for the first diluted gray beyond the hydrangeas. The counters honest in low light, their scratches visible. The sugar bowl thistle turned right. The island broad and quiet in the center, like a thing waiting to be used for what it was made for rather than what we had made of it. I opened the drawer beside the stove and took out the small ceramic bowl that had held the ring while it was absent. White glaze, faint crazing near the base, one nick on the rim from years ago when Evelyn dropped a measuring spoon into it too hard and declared it improved by experience. Then I took the ring from my pocket. Even in the dim kitchen, the gold caught what little light there was. Arthur had repaired the prong and left the scratches. Good man. It looked like marriage still, not polished into false innocence, merely sound enough to keep carrying what it had already carried. I set the bowl in the middle of the island. Then I laid the ring inside it. The small sound it made against ceramic should not have had force enough to alter a morning, but it did. There it was now in the room where Evelyn had stood and watched and redirected and refused to let spilled flour become a moral failure. Not in a drawer, not in my pocket, in the open. A witness where witnesses belonged. I pulled out the mixing bowl next. The old yellow one with the chipped lip Evelyn favored because she claimed batter behaved better in bowls that had been disappointed at least once. I set flour, eggs, milk, baking powder, salt on the counter. The tools of an ordinary Sunday, the tools of her refuge, the tools now of something else. Ben's truck turned into the drive at 6:40, earlier than I expected. He came in quietly through the back with a thermos in one hand and a face that told me he had not slept much either. Behind him was Emily, grave and kind, carrying her coat over one arm, as if already ready to leave at speed if leaving was what safety required. They saw the island, the bowl, the ring. Ben looked at me. "We doing it here?" "Yes." He nodded once. No argument. Emily set her coat on a chair and came to stand beside him. From upstairs, faintly, a floorboard sounded. I looked at the island, the bowl, the ring catching the first weak seam of dawn through the sink window, and felt fear, grief, shame, love, and an old man's late courage gather themselves into something with edges. "Nobody cleans anything today," I said. Then I reached for the flour. Just as the upstairs hall gave its first early morning creak. Ben and Emily stood near the mudroom threshold in their coats, not intruding on the kitchen, yet not absent from it either. The old yellow mixing bowl sat on the island beneath the weak gray of dawn. The ceramic bowl with Evelyn's ring rested beside it, plain in the middle of the wood, where it could not be mistaken for an afterthought or a shrine. Only a fact, gold in white clay, marriage and warning laid out together where breakfast was supposed to happen. From upstairs came another board, then the muted sound of a door opening. My hands were steadier than I expected. I cracked eggs into the bowl and added milk. Flour rose in a soft cloud when I scooped it, and the smell of it dry, faintly sweet. Ordinary as wallpaper moved through the kitchen with such immediate familiarity that my throat tightened. I could see Evelyn's hands doing the same thing. Thumb against the measuring cup. Quick tap with the knife handle against the lip of the flour canister. Batter should look slightly indecisive. The memory did not weaken me this time. It stood beside me. Ben unscrewed his thermos and poured coffee into the lid. Emily stayed near the breakfast end of the kitchen with both hands around her mug, her eyes moving over the room the way a good woman's eyes do when she has agreed to bear witness but does not intend to perform it. No one asked me if I was sure. At our age, that is a kind of love. The upstairs bathroom door shut. Water ran briefly, then June's lighter steps crossed the hall. A second set followed, slower, precise. Claire. I whisked the batter. There is something almost indecent about the way ordinary kitchen work can continue while a family is about to break apart in it. Butter on a griddle does not know the word betrayal. Flour does not understand evidence. The pan heats, the bowl rings softly under a spoon, the refrigerator hums, and meanwhile, the people in the room are standing on either side of a moral line that will not move back once crossed. June came down first. She had on a soft gray sweatshirt and dark leggings, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail not yet fully secured, as if she had done half the work of becoming presentable and expected to finish the rest after coffee. At the bottom of the stairs, she stopped. Her eyes went to Emily, then Ben, then me at the stove, then the island, then the ring. For one beat, she looked simply like a child who had walked into the wrong morning. "Grandpa," she said. "Morning, sweetheart." She did not move farther in. "Why is Uncle Ben here? Because I asked him to come." Her gaze had already returned to the ring. I watched her see it and failed to know what to do with that sight. She had never known the ring as a living thing, I supposed, only as something that had once belonged on Evelyn's hand and then had vanished into drawers and grief. "Do you want coffee cake or pancakes?" I asked. The question startled her. "Pancakes. That's what I'm making." June looked at the bowl, at the flour canister, at the ring again, then at me. "Okay," she said, and the word came out so softly it was almost a question. Behind her, Claire began down the stairs. I had expected some instinct in me to shrink then, to seek a softer entrance, a more manageable tone. Instead, I felt something settle. Claire reached the kitchen in a navy robe, belted neatly at the waist, her hair still twisted up from sleep, and stopped almost as quickly as June had. Her eyes took in Ben. Emily, the island, the ring. She did not startle. Claire had always been too practiced in the management of first reactions, but her gaze sharpened by a degree that changed the whole room. "What's this?" she asked. "Breakfast," I said. Ben said nothing. Emily neither. Claire looked at me, then at the griddle, then at the ceramic bowl. "Tom, I thought we'd all eat together. It isn't even 7. "I know." June remained by the stairs with her hands tucked into the sleeves of her sweatshirt. I could see her wrists disappear and reappear as her fingers flexed inside the cuffs. Claire walked farther into the kitchen. "Would someone like to explain why my brother and sister-in-law are standing in my father's house before dawn, looking like they've come for bad news?" Ben's jaw shifted once. Emily lowered her mug but kept her face still. I turned the first pancake as it bubbled. "Sit down, Claire." A long silence followed. The command was not something I had used on her since she was perhaps 12 years old and throwing wet gloves on the radiator after school. We had both heard it for what it was, not rage, not humiliation, but authority remembered. Claire's mouth parted slightly, then closed. "Excuse me. Sit down." She looked at June. That was the first thing she did. Not at Ben, not at Emily, not at the ring or the bowl or the batter or the old yellow mixing bowl whose chipped lip had once seen 100 safer mornings. She looked at June. The movement was small, practiced, probably invisible to anyone who had not spent 2 days training his whole attention on those glances. But June answered it at once. Her shoulders tightened. Her chin dipped half an inch. "June," I said before Claire could speak, "you sit too. Here." I pulled out the stool in the middle of the island. Not the edge one she usually took. The room held still. June's eyes went from the stool to Claire to me. "Sorry, no." My voice came out calm, stronger than I felt. "No, you don't start that way today. Sit here. If truth has any sound at all, perhaps it sounds like that, not loud, only clean enough that the room knows a different set of rules has entered." June did not move at first. Then Emily very quietly walked around to the other side of the island and sat in the chair nearest the window as if nothing in the world were more ordinary than taking the 4th place at breakfast. She smiled up at June, nothing bright, nothing pitying, just room made visible. Ben took the stool beside her. The arrangement shifted. There was now a space in the center for June that did not feel like a trap, because other adults had already taken their own seats without drama. June came slowly and sat where I had indicated. Claire remained standing. I plated the first pancake and set it before June. Butter followed. Syrup. Then a second for Ben, a third for Emily. I turned back to the stove and poured more batter. "Tom, Claire said you need to explain yourself now. I am going to. When everybody is here, and nobody is moving around, clearing or fixing anything." Her gaze hardened. This is ridiculous. I laid the ladle down and turned to face her fully. It may be. Sit down anyway. There was a moment then, I think now it was the last moment in which the morning might have chosen another shape if Claire had been capable of choosing anything but control. If she had sat, asked plainly admitted confusion, even offered something human and frightened, perhaps the room would still have broken, but differently. Claire did not do that. Instead, she smiled. It was a lovely smile in the useless external sense. The kind that had gotten her school committee positions and neighborly trust and all the credit that goes to women who know how to arrange their own faces like clean tables. "June," she said lightly, "go upstairs and finish getting dressed." June did not rise. No one moved. Claire looked at her again. "Now please." I said, "She's staying." The smile slipped. "She does not need to be part of adult melodrama. This is about her. She stays." At that, Claire turned to Ben. "And you brought Emily for what exactly?" Applause. Ben's voice, when it came, was low enough to shame the rest of us. "I brought my wife because if anything hard is going to be said in this house, June deserves at least one woman in the room who isn't trying to control the air." The words landed harder because he did not throw them. Claire looked at him for a long second and then at me again. "So, this is coordinated?" "Yes," I said. "Against me?" "No." I paused. "For June. And for Evelyn." The name changed her face. "Ah. There you were," I thought. "Not the whole of you, perhaps, but the part Evelyn had seen and carried without being able to bring me to it in time." Claire pulled out a stool at the far end of the island and sat. Not because she accepted the authority of the room, because standing would have made the conflict visible in ways she could not manage. Even now she was staging. I set the last pancake on the warming plate, turned off the stove, and came to the island with my coffee mug in hand. Then I sat opposite June with the ceramic bowl and the ring between us all. No one ate. For a moment the kitchen sounded only like itself. The refrigerator, the ticking clock above the mudroom door, a truck passing on Oakview, the faint hiss of cooling metal from the griddle. The first true daylight had come up enough now to show the scratches in the butcher block and the little black crazing lines in the ceramic bowl's glaze. Evelyn's ring lay there in the open repaired prong, catching a line of pale morning. I put my hand on the wood. "When I took Evelyn's ring to Arthur Bell," I said, "he told me she'd asked him to remember something if the day ever came that I brought it in alone." Claire sat absolutely still. June looked at the ring and nowhere else. "He asked me whether the girl still says sorry before she speaks." That was the first time I said it aloud in the house. The sentence entered the kitchen like a second weather front. June's shoulders rose. Emily's fingers tightened around her mug. Ben looked at Claire with an expression I had only seen on him once before the day we buried Evelyn. Claire made a small sound through her nose. "We are actually doing this." "Yes," I said. She was worried about June's anxiety after the divorce. "I already told you that. You told me that after you filed away a counselor's concern in a drawer and wrote 'overreach' across it." The smile vanished altogether. June's head came up. Claire turned her face toward me slowly. "You went through my things. I went through my house. Your house." She let that settle and glanced once around the kitchen. Interesting word choice given the circumstances. Evelyn's, too. Something flashed across Claire's features, then anger. Yes, but also something like contempt for the very mention of shared ownership. A house to Claire was apparently whatever the most controlling person inside it could organize into obedience. I reached into my shirt pocket and set the folded copies of Arthur's repair slips on the island, flattening them with my palm. Then the camp incident form, then the printout of Marlene's email. Paper looked pitifully fragile in that room. All those years of weather meals, corrections, holiday napkins, and here at the end it came down partly to paper anyway. Not because paper was enough by itself, because paper allowed memory to stop being argued into mist. These are dates, I said. Arthur's repair slips, resizing prong check setting inspection. Evelyn took the ring in 3 times over 2 years. Too many for ordinary maintenance. On one of those slips, Arthur wrote a note because Evelyn told him not to forget to ask about June. Claire said nothing. I picked up the counselor email. Marlene Keating sent this about June's apologizing and self-correcting language. You called it overreach and put it in a drawer. Claire's voice, when it came, was almost bored. You are describing a difference of opinion among adults. No. The word surprised even me with its firmness. I am describing a pattern. June had gone very pale. Her hands were hidden inside her sleeves again. I could see the fabric tremble once where her fingers moved. Sweetheart, Emily said softly, turning slightly toward her. You don't have to say anything right now. Claire's head snapped toward Emily. Do not patronize my daughter. Ben's hand came down flat on the island. Not a bang, not a threat, just a fact. She said, Sweetheart, he replied. Try hearing it the first time. That did something to Claire, not a collapse yet, but the smoothness began to crack at the edges. I reached for the camp form and slid it nearer her. June was at camp 2 summers ago. You told us she overreacted to another kid falling. Evelyn wrote, not nearby on the incident form because the story you told didn't match the event. Why Claire looked at the paper and then at me. Her face had gone whiter, which on her made the cheekbones stand out sharply. Because she said, I did not think every messy detail of a child's distress needed to become family folklore. Messy detail, I repeated. Yes, Tom, messy detail. That is what families without good boundaries turn into an endless museum of each other's weak moments. The line hung in the room like a wire. Weak moments. I looked at June. She was staring at the syrup bottle as if it had acquired the complexity of scripture. Do you hear that? I asked Claire quietly. Do you hear yourself? I hear myself very clearly. Yes, I said. You do. And there finally was the shape of it. Not a woman unaware of her own fault. A woman entirely convinced that force was virtue if it kept life from embarrassing itself. I stood up. The stool legs scraped the floor and everyone looked at me except June. I had not planned a speech. I had planned a sequence evidence witness timing, but grief and shame had been building in me too long to let the moral center of the thing stay technical. I loved Evelyn, I said. I loved her in this kitchen. I loved her in this house. I thought loving her meant preserving what she left behind. I thought if I kept the drawers the same and the towels folded and the Sunday steady, then I was doing right by her. I looked at the ring in the bowl. What I understand now is that she was doing far more than keeping a house. She was protecting room for a child to breathe in it, and I mistook that labor for personality. Claire rolled her eyes, small, almost invisible, but I saw it. No, I said, and my voice sharpened. No, you will not do that this morning. Silence. June's head lifted. Ben's gaze came to me. So did Emily's. I went on. You used my gratitude. You used my belief that calm was kindness. You used grief after she died. You used all of it to make this house look stable while June learned to apologize before she even knew what she'd done. Claire let out one short breath. This is unbelievable. That may be. I leaned both hands on the island. Then help me understand why June cannot answer a harmless question without watching your face first. June flinched. Claire turned instantly. June, look at me. There it was. Immediate. Reflexive. The line of force so practiced it outran thought. Before June could obey, I said, No. Claire's eyes came back to mine. She looks wherever she wants, I said. The room changed then, not because of volume, because for the first time in years, perhaps in June's memory, Claire had given a direction in the kitchen, and another adult had not merely softened it or joked around it, but stopped it cold. June went very still. Claire's nostrils flared once. "You are making her more anxious." "No, I am letting her feel what your absence of control sounds like." Emily rose then and came to stand beside June's stool. She rested one hand lightly on the back of it without touching June herself. It was an extraordinary thing to witness the intelligence of that choice. Not claiming, not soothing too fast, just making it visible that another body could stand near the child without demanding anything from her. Ben spoke next. "Dad's not the only one who saw it. I stopped bringing my kids around as much because this house always felt too tight around you. Evelyn said June was most relaxed on Sunday mornings before you were fully up. I should have said more sooner. I didn't. That's on me. But I'm saying it now." Claire looked at him with naked loathing at last. "Of course you are. You've always hated that someone had standards." Ben shook his head. "No, I hate that you call fear standards." The line landed and stayed. Claire stood abruptly, the stool scraping back. "I am not going to sit here while the three of you invent pathology because none of you can tolerate discipline in a girl." June whispered, "Mom, don't." Claire turned on her with that terrible calm. "Do not perform confusion right now." The word perform hit June like a hand, though no hand touched her. Her shoulders drew in, her mouth opened, and that was when the flour spilled. Not from carelessness theatrical enough to serve as symbol, only because June's sleeve caught the open flour canister at the edge of the island while she recoiled. It tipped, struck the wood, and a pale fan of flour spread across the butcher block, drifting over the bowl. The recipe card I had laid out the syrup bottle the heel of my hand. Some of it dusted the ceramic bowl. A faint white veil settled over Evelyn's ring. For one impossible second, everyone froze. Then June said it, reflexive, immediate, from somewhere below thought. "Sorry." The word cracked in the middle. She half rose from the stool, already reaching for a towel that was not there, eyes gone wide with the old terror of having made the room heavier. Claire moved first. Of course she did. Her hand went toward the paper towel drawer. "And I said louder than I had spoken in that house since Evelyn died. Leave it." No one moved. The flour lay where it had fallen bright against the scarred wood. The ring shone through a white dusting. June remained halfway off the stool, one hand in the air. I stepped around the island and very gently lowered her back down by the shoulders. "Leave it," I said again, quieter now. "Nobody is cleaning anything." June stared at me as if I had spoken another language. Claire's face had changed, not into rage exactly, worse, into the revealed contempt of a person whose system has failed publicly and who cannot reach the old tools fast enough to reassemble it. "This is insane," she said. "She made a mess. People clean messes." "Yes," I answered. "People do. Children do not have to apologize for existing before they do it. That is not what this is. It is exactly what this is." "No." Claire laughed then, but the laugh was gone hard at the edges. "No, what this is a room full of sentimental adults who want to turn one anxious child into a moral drama because they're too weak to say discipline matters." I looked at June. Her eyes were wet now, but she was not crying. She had gone into that awful held-breath space I knew too well by now, the place where a child tries to become smaller than conflict, so conflict will miscount and pass over her. "June," I said, and waited until she looked at me. "Did Grandma Evelyn ever tell you why she liked making pancakes on Sundays?" A long pause. Then June swallowed. She said the kitchen looked happier with flour on it. The silence that followed was the kind that changes the future by entering it. Claire closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, her voice was low and lethal with control. That was Evelyn's problem. She romanticized disorder and called it love. "No," I said. She understood that love is not proved by how quickly a child learns to erase herself. Claire stared at me. Then the mask went the rest of the way. It did not shatter. She did not scream. She did not throw a plate or confess into the ceiling light. Claire's collapse was truer and uglier than that. She simply stopped bothering to make her standards sound humane. "You want honesty," she said. "Fine." June is difficult when no one is making her better. She spirals. She forgets. She drifts. She makes ordinary life heavier than it needs to be, and if I do not stay on top of that every minute, the whole day gets eaten by feelings and mess and excuses. Evelyn indulged it because Evelyn liked being the good one. "You," she pointed at me, "you liked not having to decide. Ben likes women he doesn't answer to. Emily gets to stand there playing saint because she goes home afterward. But I am the one who has to live with consequences." There it was. Not discipline, not care. Consequences. The child as burden to be preemptively managed. June made the smallest sound I have ever heard a person make. Not a sob. Something thinner. A wound receiving its own name. I think that was the moment my heroism, if anyone wishes to call it that, became less about evidence than about refusing to let another sentence like that become family air. "You will stop talking about her, as if she is a weather system," I said. Claire turned that bright, vicious calm back on me. Or what I looked at, the ring dusted in flour. At the old yellow mixing bowl. At June's hands hidden in her sleeves. At Ben standing up fully now. At Emily's hand still on the stool. At the kitchen where Evelyn had kept making room inside a structure I had mistaken for peace. "Or you leave this house this morning," I said. No one breathed. Claire let out a low, incredulous laugh. "You can't be serious." "I am." "With what authority?" For a second I thought she meant legal authority. Property, residency, temporary rights. Then I understood she meant something else. She meant moral permission. She meant the old script in which I was the man who avoided rupture because decency and passivity had looked enough alike for too long. With the authority I said of the man who finally understands what this room has cost. The words came without shaking. I will be grateful for that until I die. Claire stared at me, then at Ben, then at Emily, then at June, who flinched before her eyes even reached her. And because cruelty prefers the smaller target when the larger one no longer yields, Claire said very softly, "You've done this." June's face crumpled not into tears, but into an expression of raw responsibility so immediate it nearly stopped my heart. There it was. In full daylight, the child taking the moral hit for the room. "No," I said, and the force in me then was not anger, not grief, but something cleaner. "No. I have done this, by not seeing." Evelyn tried to tell me in every way she could keep a child safe and stay close enough to her to matter. Arthur told me. Marlene told me. Ben showed me. The house itself told me. And now you have told me too. I stepped between Claire and June. It was not theatrical, only necessary. I was an older man in a kitchen flour, on my slacks pancake batter drying on the bowl, one hand shaking a little at the wrist. Yet I had never in my life felt more exactly where I should stand. "Go upstairs," I said to Claire. "Pack a bag for 2 nights. Ben will take you to the hotel on Route 40. After that, we will do this properly." Her eyes widened at that, finally, not because of the accusation, but because process had entered. Witnesses. Time, concrete steps, the world beyond her domestic atmosphere. "You have no right to separate me from my daughter. I have every right to interrupt what is happening to my granddaughter until outside people can step in. Marlene Keating is already aware. So is a family attorney," she recommended. "If you want to test where legal procedure begins, we can do that with less talking and more phone calls." For the first time, fear crossed Claire's face. Real fear. Not of guilt, of losing narrative control to systems she did not administer. "You called people." "Yes." She looked at Ben as if betrayal had only just become visible. "You're part of this." "Yes," he said. Emily added, her voice steady and not unkind. Claire, no one is trying to destroy you, but you are not leaving here alone with June today. That landed differently because it was true. We were not arranging a melodramatic downfall. We were interrupting access. Claire's shoulders drew back. You, self-righteous. Careful, Ben said quietly. She spun on him. No, you be careful. All of you. You have no idea what it takes to parent a child like... She stopped. Too late. The unfinished phrase hung in the room like a body. A child like what? Hard, embarrassing, emotionally expensive. The omission condemned her better than any full sentence would have. June's eyes closed. I turned immediately, crouched in front of her stool despite the protest in my knees, and said as gently as I knew how, "Listen to me. None of this is your fault. Not the flower, not the forms, not the dinners, not any of it. Do you understand?" She was crying now, but so quietly it looked almost like breath failing. "Do you understand?" I asked again. A tiny nod. "Say it if you can." Her mouth trembled. "Not my fault." "That's right." Behind me I heard Claire move, then stop when Ben stepped into her path. I did not have to turn to know it. The kitchen had become legible enough by then that bodies sounded like intention. The next hour did not pass neatly. Nothing that matters does. Claire went upstairs first with Ben behind her, and Emily remaining in the kitchen with June while I made the phone calls I had hoped I would not need and had known I would. Marlene answered. Then the attorney. She had mentioned a woman named Carol Ingram, with a voice like polished wood and the efficient compassion of someone who has spent 20 years turning domestic fog into documented sequence. She told me exactly what I could and could not do, what emergency leverage we had by consent and witness, and credible concern how to keep the morning from becoming abduction spectacle or stupidness. The language was dry and therefore merciful. She said things like temporary separation, voluntary hotel placement, documented witness statements, immediate follow-up. The practical world entering a damaged kitchen. Bless it for that. Claire came back down with a suitcase and her purse and the same blue robe now under a camel coat. She had dressed carefully. Of course she had. Even in retreat, she would not surrender presentation. June was still at the island, not because she had been forced to remain there, but because movement seemed beyond her. Emily had made tea, no one drank. The flour still lay over half the butcher block. The spilled canister stood where it had fallen. The pancake batter had formed a thin skin in the bowl. Claire stopped near the mudroom door. "I'll be contacting my own attorney." "That is your right," I said. "This is madness." "Maybe." Her eyes flicked to June. "Come on, baby. Get your things." June did not move. The silence after that was the most honest silence of the entire morning. Not dramatic, only plain. A child not rising when called, because perhaps for the first time she had room not to. Claire's face changed again. Something like naked injury flashed through it, then calcified. "Fine," she said. She picked up her suitcase. At the door, she turned back to me. "You always did this." I looked at her. "You always let the softer woman be, right?" she said. "There are accusations that wound because they are entirely false. There are others that wound because they use one sliver of truth to cover a structure of lies. I had preferred softness, yes. I had let Evelyn's intelligence come to me packaged as grace because grace was easier to admire than strategy. Claire had lived beside that weakness for years. Perhaps she had built her whole confidence around it. "Not this time," I said. She stood there a beat longer, as if waiting for one more person in the room to choose her version of reality. No one did. Then Ben opened the back door. Cold morning air entered and Claire left my house. The latch closed behind her with an ordinary click. No one moved. There is a kind of silence that is merely absence of sound. This one was not that. This one was a rearrangement of ownership. The kitchen had lost a governing pressure and did not yet know what shape to take without it. June stared at the back door. Then very quietly she said, "She's going to be mad." The sentence was so heartbreakingly small that Emily turned away and looked out the window for a second before answering. But I did not let anyone else take it first. "She already is," I said. "That is not your job." June looked at me. Really looked. Her face was blotched now, and there was flour on one sleeve from where she had instinctively reached across the island before I stopped her. She looked younger than 14 and older in the same moment. "What happens now?" she whispered. I glanced at the flour-covered ring in the bowl. "Now," I said, "we tell the truth in the right order." The rest of that day was all order, and every piece of it hurt. Carol Ingram came in person before noon, compact and gray-haired and brisk in a way I found instantly trustworthy because she did not once call anyone brave or broken or anything else that sounded good in books. She sat at my dining room table with a legal pad and took statements while the dining room looked for the first time in my adult life useful rather than ceremonial. Ben gave his. Emily gave hers. I gave mine. June spoke less, as she should not have been required to do more, but what she did say had force enough. She described not one dramatic event, but a whole weather system, how mistakes felt, how forms had to be reported, how she watched tone, how if she spilled or forgot or said the wrong thing the room changed, and she felt she had to hurry and fix herself before anyone else had to do it for her. Carol asked careful questions, not leading, not theatrical. She listened, wrote clarified, and at the end she said the sentence I had needed some professional to say out loud in my own house. "This is coercive family control," she said. "Not in a criminal movie sense. In the very real sense that a child's internal life has been organized around appeasing one adult's thresholds." The words did not solve anything, but they gave the thing shape in public air. By late afternoon, arrangements were in motion. Temporary guardianship paperwork, contact limitations, a scheduled session with a child therapist Carol trusted, Claire's attorney making stiff noises over the phone. And then once he heard enough of the pattern and witness list sounding less stiff and more cautious. The world beyond the kitchen taking over where kitchens should not have to. Somewhere in the middle of that, I went upstairs to our bedroom and stood by the cedar chest. I was not there long enough only to open the lid, lift the top blanket, and lay the camp incident envelope beneath it beside the photo albums and Evelyn's first apron, not hidden, not enshrined, just placed among the things that had become record instead of memory. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and cried. Not violently. Older men of my sort are not built for catharsis the way movies imagine. I sat with both hands over my face and let the tears come, and felt in no tidy order. Grief for Evelyn, shame for myself. Pity for Claire's damaged fury at what she had made of it, terror over how close I had come to letting this all continue under the name of family effort. And something else too, something like respect late and devastating for the quiet, strategic courage of the woman I had loved. She had not left me a note. She had not arranged some posthumous stage trick. She had stayed in the room as long as she could while making a child's life bearable in small, deniable ways. She had sent the ring out when she needed another witness. She had written, "Let her spill." She had stood in front of milk and flour and pancakes and done the unglamorous work of keeping one corner of the world from teaching a child the wrong lesson. I had loved her. I had not understood her enough. By evening, the house felt larger and more exhausted. Ben and Emily stayed through supper. No one had appetite. Emily made broth from the chicken Claire had bought and cut the lemons anyway because waste had begun to offend her sense of order more than anyone else's. June sat on the back porch, wrapped in one of my sweaters, and looked out at the hydrangeas for so long that eventually I went and sat beside her without speaking. The dusk had gone lavender over the yard. Somewhere down the block, a basketball thudded once, then again, then stopped. The porch boards gave beneath my weight. After a while, June said, "Grandma, Evelyn knew." "Yes, she never said it mean." "No." Another long quiet. Then, was I bad? I turned to her so fast the old chair protested. No. But Mom always said if I just remembered things on time and didn't overreact and paid attention, everything could be easier for everybody. I leaned forward, hands clasped, because some truths must be given without any of the old family softness that lets them blur back into doubt. Listen to me. Making yourself smaller is not the same thing as making life easier. And adults who need children to shrink so the room feels manageable are the ones making life hard, not the children. June looked down at her hands inside my sweater sleeves. I don't know how not to. I know. She nodded once. A child's nod, not agreement so much as temporary storage. We sat until the cold reached our feet. That night, the house sounded different. Not cheerful, not healed, merely less braced. The first floor no longer waited for Claire's steps to tell it what tone it was allowed to take. The dining room, stripped of its evening reset, looked almost embarrassed in the moonlight chairs slightly off and one placemat still crooked from Carol's paperwork spread. The mudroom wall remained covered in lists and directives, but now that its author was absent, it seemed oddly flimsy. Administrative rather than inevitable. I stood before it after everyone had gone to bed and removed the top calendar page with both hands. The paper tore at the spiral binding. Good. Beneath it was the previous month. More notes, more pencil. I tore that down too. Then the next. Then the chore clipboard. Then the little side note that said, "Watch tone at dinner." I left the bread magnet because Evelyn had liked it and because not every artifact of a bad system belongs to the bad system. The wall beneath was a paler rectangle where sun had not reached. It looked unfinished and plain, and for the first time honest. I slept 3 hours straight. In the morning, June came into the kitchen before I had started coffee. She stood by the island in yesterday's leggings and one of Ben's old t-shirts I had dug from a storage box because all of her own clothes suddenly seemed tied to somebody else's instructions. "Morning," I said. "Morning." She looked around the kitchen as if seeing whether it still belonged to yesterday or had reverted overnight to the old order. I opened the cabinet for mugs. Cocoa A beat. Then, "Yes, please?" "No, sorry." The absence of that word nearly undid me all over again. I made cocoa. She sat on the middle stool without being asked, though not all the way relaxed, and wrapped both hands around the mug. We did not force conversation. Some mercies belong in not being made meaningful too fast. Over the next week, reality did what reality does after moral events. It became administrative and tender by turns. Carol handled paperwork and interim arrangements. A child therapist named Dr. Alvarez entered our lives with cardigans, direct eyes, and an office that managed not to look like a cartoon of childhood. Ben came by almost daily. Emily stocked my freezer with soups and, without ever making a show of it, helped June relearn what ordinary noise could sound like in a kitchen. Claire called twice, both times through attorneys, both times with language so careful it might have come off a machine. It turns out even controlling people submit to procedure when enough witnesses stand up at once. None of it felt triumphant. That mattered. I did not want triumph. Triumph would have simplified things falsely. Claire was not a movie villain driven away to thunder. She was my daughter. She had been a little girl once who kept her own shoes in perfect rows after her mother and I divorced, because some children too respond to fracture by trying to become furniture. Somewhere between that child and the woman who sat in my kitchen calling fear standards, a line had gone terribly wrong. I could pity that without yielding June back to it. I had to learn that too. The first true shift in the house came not with lawyers or therapy or even sleep, but with breakfast the following Sunday. I woke before dawn again, though this time not from dread. From habit first, and then from something gentler. The old yellow bowl waited in the cabinet. The flour canister stood where I had left it since the confrontation. I had wiped the island that morning after everyone finally went to bed, but I had not polished it. A faint, pale trace remained in the grain where the flour had gotten into the scratches. I kept it there on purpose. June came down in mismatched socks and one of Emily's 2 large sweatshirts. Her hair was loose and badly brushed. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at me, then at the bowl, then at the flour. "You're doing pancakes again," she said. "I thought we might." She stood there another second. "Can I help?" "Yes." Not because it was symbolic. Because pancakes need making. I handed her the measuring cup. At first, she moved carefully as if the old system might still be waiting behind the refrigerator to reclaim jurisdiction. Flour into the cup. Level with a knife. Tap on the canister. 1 egg cracked too hard and left shell in the bowl. She froze. Then she looked at me. There are moments when a whole future can hide inside an adult's face. I made mine as plain as I knew how. "It's just shell," I said. "Fish it out." She did. Her hand shook a little. Then less. I turned the griddle on. Butter softened in the pan. Light came slowly over the sink and through the side window, touching the pantry wallpaper, lemons, and the edge of the island, and the ceramic bowl I had set in the middle again that morning. The ring lay inside it. Not because I meant to keep it there forever. I had thought for a few days of putting it away properly, or perhaps having it made into something for June one day when she was old enough to choose her own relation to it. But every place I imagined for it felt either hidden or too ceremonious. The ceramic bowl on the island near the old yellow mixing bowl seemed right for now. The ring was no longer a relic of my marriage alone. It was part of the house's corrected truth. June poured the batter and missed the center of the griddle by a good inch. The pancake slid sideways into an oval with one tail like Missouri. She stared at it. Then, unexpectedly, I laughed. Not hard, not mockingly, just with the deep, surprised relief of a man who has waited too long to hear imperfection sound harmless. June looked at me, then at the pancake. Then, after a tiny pause in which I could almost see the old reflex start up and fail to find purchase, she laughed too. It was not loud yet, but it was real. Ben arrived mid-morning with Lily and Sam, who tore into the house in a way I would once have called unruly and now simply recognized as alive. Emily came behind them with strawberries. The kitchen filled. Chairs ended up crooked. Syrup dripped. Lily told June her pancake looked like a rabbit hit by weather, and June snorted cocoa out her nose and laughed in earnest. Really laughed, open-mouthed and uncorrected, while I reached for a towel and then did not use it right away because no one needed immediate rescue from harmless mess. At one point, flour got on the ring again. Sam, trying to see how much he could help without actually helping, knocked the spoon against the canister and sent a little white dust over the island. It settled across the ceramic bowl and over the gold band so lightly it looked for an instant as though the ring itself were breathing out some old memory of batter mornings. No one rushed. That mattered more than any verdict. I stood at the sink with the window over the yard, throwing soft February turned March light across the counter, and watched my family, my changed, reduced, partially reclaimed family, occupy the kitchen in a way it had not been occupied honestly in years. Ben at the coffee maker, Emily cutting strawberries, Lily stealing one and grinning, Sam poking at the edge of his pancake with forensic disgust, June with flour on one sleeve and syrup on 2 fingers, and the kind of laughter that does not stop to ask permission. The house was not healed. The formal dining room still existed. The mudroom still held a paler square where the command wall had been. Claire's absence lay over certain rooms in ways I suspect it always will. There were attorneys, therapists, future Saturdays I could not yet imagine. There was the unrecoverable fact that Evelyn had carried too much alone and that I had let love become admiration where it should have been alliance. None of that changed because children laughed over breakfast. But the kitchen changed. That is not a small thing. I took the towel from my shoulder and wiped my hands. Then I went to the island, turned the misshapen pancake on June's plate, right side up, as if shape could be decided kindly after the fact, and sat down among them. No one hurried to clear. No one reached first for the spill. No one said sorry. And in the ceramic bowl at the center of the island, where morning light gathered and flowers still rested in the scratches of the wood beneath it, Evelyn's wedding ring caught the sun and held it there while June laughed again, louder this time with her whole mouth open, and I let the mess stay.